Scary Stories Collection, 5 Short Horror Stories. Written by Stories from the Attic. Narrated by Robin McConnell. Shut In. The day the quarantine was announced, the only thing I could think of was Mother. Yes, behind that, the memories crept closer, shadows and dark things, not forgotten, but suppressed, the knot of fear in my belly that had been tied long ago. But more than that, more than anything, I thought of her. In the 56 years since she arrived in Britain from Turkey, not once had she spent an entire day inside. In fact, it was rare to see her spend more than a few hours indoors. When she did, she restlessly moved between rooms, pacing and shifting from one seat to the other, always inching closer to the doors, to the outside. Most often, when I went round to visit, I would find her in the garden, or sitting out on the front step, waving to children and sharing jokes with passers-by, for whom she had long been a fixture. I had lost count of the number of times I'd been told by concerned neighbours that I should make sure to get your mother inside out of the weather, and also of the times she had scolded them for sticking their noses where they weren't wanted, and speaking to me on her behalf, as if she weren't there or in full possession of her faculties. "Why you talk to him?" she would shout, in a Turkish accent still as thick as the coffee she made, despite having lived in England for over 3 decades. "I am here. I'm not stupid. You want talk, you talk to me. If I want stay outside, I stay outside. None of your damn business." She would say this with a shake of the fist and a dismissive sucking of the teeth, a gesture I had never quite managed to master, but which I admired for its expressiveness. Once you heard that sound, you were in no doubt what it meant. I must admit, however, that despite her stubborn consternation, at times I had agreed with the neighbours. Once, during a particularly harsh winter, I had found her sitting on a deck chair on the front step with a blanket of snow draped over her. Beside her was an upright electric heater that she had dragged outside and angled in such a way that it would provide some warmth and protection against the elements. The wire for this heater had been stretched clumsily through an open window. I stared at her, huddled and shivering in disbelief. Whilst I appreciated the fact that the heater was probably the only thing keeping the stubborn old bird from getting hypothermia, the threat of electrocution meant that we argued about it, and once she had finally calmed down, I made her promise not to bring the heater outside again. The next time I visited, she was sitting outside in the snow again, but she had kept her promise. This time, instead of pulling out the heater, she had smashed up a kitchen chair and built herself a fire. "There is only me here," she said when I asked why she decided to destroy the furniture. "Why do I need 6 chairs? Don't like sitting inside anyway." I suppose she did have a point. Around 5 years ago, a sympathetic few friends and I, who understood what Mother was like, had been forced to construct a 3-sided gazebo extension at the back of the house, the planning permission for which is still somewhat dubious. We built it, unbelievably, for Mother to sleep in. Over the past year, she had been plagued by nightmares about the time before, and had steadfastly refused to sleep inside the house any longer. Instead, she had taken to dragging her mattress into the back garden and sleeping outside, either on the grass, on the paving stones under the large fur blankets she assured us were used by shepherds in the fields, or under the small porch in front of the house. The building we were forced to put up was glass on 3 sides and completely open to the elements at the front. Along the back wall, we attached a network of radiators and heaters to wastefully warm that portion of the room before the heat escaped, and pulled her bed in front of it. My mother, at 76 years of age, slept in what was little more than an upmarket greenhouse with an open front. But then, that was how she liked it, and heaven help anyone who chose to tell her otherwise. Not that she had any trouble sleeping. Despite her advanced age, my mother's usual way of avoiding being shut up in the house was to be as far from it as possible. Even at 76, she would walk somewhere close to 15 miles a day, disappearing into the hills that surrounded the town and wandering for hours on end. Whilst this might sound like cause for concern, and many would worry about their elderly relatives wandering in the peaks. For her, the open expanses were where she was most safe. The practice kept her fit and meant that by the time she lay down to sleep at night, she was physically exhausted, and in the new open sleeping areas, the nightmares came less frequently. As lockdown approached, I realized more and more that this routine was going to be hard to give up. When people think of claustrophobia, they think of elevators or tiny cramped spaces that would make anyone breathe shallow breaths. My mother's claustrophobia was not like that. She didn't want to be shut in at all. She simply couldn't deal with the idea of being trapped, pinned down, or enclosed. She would often remind me that the claustro in claustrophobia referred to a bolt, as in something used to seal a lock or door, which, she would point out, was ironic because bolt was exactly what she wanted to do whenever she even thought of being caught inside. My mother had decided 56 years earlier that she never wanted to be sealed in or locked down ever again, which was a problem considering what was about to be announced. I watched the daily press conferences leading up to quarantine in the kitchen. The British Prime Minister, whose jowly, hound dog face always looked as if it was partway through losing a battle with gravity anyway, looked even more sullen than usual as he spoke in direct terms through frowns and grimaces of the possible human cost of the virus. The hard, declarative sentences he used were meant, I suppose, to show that he was leveling with the people, being frank, truthful, and direct. In practice, they actually made him sound increasingly cold and remote, distanced from the reality even as he measured its dimensions. He spoke in certainties of families losing loved ones before their time, and I felt my jaw tighten. How dare he speak in such blasé terms about other people's loved ones? How, I wondered, did he manage to speak with such offhand irreverence about cherished human lives? Lives like mothers. By the time the quarantine was officially announced, I had already moved in full-time with Mother. At first, she was typically grumpy about it, huffing and complaining loudly at every opportunity, as if having me there were a huge inconvenience or a restriction on her hard-won freedom. "Now you move in," she grumbled with a wave of the hand. "More reason to be outside." Despite this, I knew deep down that she appreciated me being there. That night, we watched the announcement together. Like most people I have spoken to about the whole thing, I have to admit that the apparent seriousness of the situation did make my stomach tighten, and I felt a familiar pang of fear. My mother, seeming to recognize the glint of fear in my eyes, rested her good hand on mine and squeezed. Then, with a level of acceptance and humility I was not expecting, I saw her nod her head as she whispered, "I stay in if you stay in. It will be okay. We have been inside together before." I threw her a smile, knowing that she was right on both counts. It would be okay, and we had, of course, been inside together before. I squeezed her hand back, careful not to squeeze too tightly and bruise her fragile skin. She caught me looking at her and turned her head away, sucking her teeth at the screen. "Why, this man is Boris. He is no Russian, this Boris." At this we both laughed, though we knew that the laughter was a curtain, a concealing shield held up to hide what lurked behind, what always lurked behind. For behind this veil of humour hung the memory of the last time we were inside together, and the real, horrifying reason why she never wanted to be inside again. I was 6 years old the day the sky fell down. At 6 years old, every day seems to last forever. Even an hour is like an age. In our tomb under the table, the days seemed even longer. But I still kept count. I was 6 years, 14 days by the time we finally got out. The earthquake struck on my 6th birthday. Minutes before it happened, the surface of the table had been laid with a fabulous spread of treats and even, wonder of wonders, a cake. I remember even then, at such a young age, looking at the collected goodies and noticing how out of place they seemed. Our home, before it was destroyed by the earthquake, was a sparse apartment on the bottom floor of a dilapidated building in one of the poorer quarters of Istanbul. It consisted of a single room, a dark concrete box with a single glassless window and walls the colour of autumn skies. The overwhelming impression given by the place was one of scarcity, the banality forced upon those that can afford no better and who live and die surrounded by the muted, grey palette of want. But not on my birthday. My mother was a proud woman, and no son of hers was going to see his birthday flash by as just another measure in a life of drudgery. A birthday, she insisted, should be special. On that day, my mother, having saved what meagre pittance she was able to earn, spent it in preparation. She laid the table with an array of cheap but brightly wrapped delights that seemed to us to leap from the grey like a glorious red tulip, growing, somehow, through a crack in the pavement. The meagre light afforded by our single window meant that much of the room was in a constant state of near darkness. The areas that were lit were illuminated ineffectively by my mother's old oil lamp, meaning that the walls around us seemed forever to dance with crowds of flickering shadows. Against that dull background, the suites looked incongruous, wrong, and out of place. Yet they filled my young mind with such excitement. It is a wonder to me now that at the time the wrappers themselves were as great a marvel as their contents. Colour was rare here, and a thing to be cherished. On a normal day, these things were tantalizingly and tortuously out of reach. As it so happened, the earthquake ensured that they would remain that way. The strange thing about earthquakes, when they happen, is that for the first few seconds you wonder if the problem is with you, inside your head. Your mind struggles to come to terms with the fact that the horizon seems to be quivering, that the ground beneath you is shifting, and the walls are beginning to shake. In the fraction of a second it takes your mind to jump to the word earthquake and make sense of what is happening. Your thoughts spill into the blur created by the event. As a newly minted 6-year-old who had never before experienced an earthquake, I was terrified. My mother, having already reached the moment of epiphany that told her what was happening, gripped my arm with such force that the action left bruises, and with a single yanking motion, dragged me from my chair heavily onto the floor and pulled me under the table. Seconds later, the chair on which I had been sitting was crushed by the internal wall, collapsing inward as the 2 floors above our dwelling caved in around us and everything went dark. Both my mother and sister screamed, but they were very different sounds. My sister's cry was of pure 4-year-old fear. My mother's was different, of pain. Mother's quick thinking, to drag us both, clutched to her chest beneath the table, had saved us from the falling building, but it had also sealed us in. Around us, on all 4 sides, huge slabs of rubble, concrete, brick, and dust stood in haphazard piles. They had fallen on top and around the table so that we were now enclosed within the cavity created by its dimensions. It was as if the room had shrunk, hammered from every side like a soda can being crushed in seconds to become 1/100th of its size. As if even the tiny patch we had been afforded in life was considered to be too much, and now the only space that God would allow us was the space beneath the table. The space in which we were now trapped. My mother's foot had been outside of that space, half of it protruding out beyond the ordained area of sanctuary. As such, that foot was punished. From the scream she had let out, I knew immediately that the foot had been crushed. The table itself was of heavy oak and had been the only piece of furniture in the room when we had moved in. It was a sturdy piece which, like Atlas, was now holding what seemed like most of the building across its surface. The surface where only minutes earlier my birthday cake had been. I remember wondering how long the table's 4 legs could hold. The initial blackness that had come with the quake was disrupted now by a single shaft of light that spilt into the small space and gave me my first glimpse of my mother's agonized expression. Her face and hair, covered in a thick layer of dust cast out by the collapsing building, seemed to have been claimed by the grey, as if the walls themselves had reached out and taken her, absorbing her into themselves and making her one of their own. She caught my eye and, coughing furiously, winced as she tried to turn. Then she told me not to be scared, to show how brave I was, and to see if I could find the jar at the bottom by her feet. I shifted my hips back and forth, sometimes catching and sometimes slipping under the table ceiling, and managed as best I could to turn my body and slither past my mother and sister toward the bottom of our new rectangular abode. There, undamaged, was the large clay pot my mother always kept under the table and which I knew was filled with water. "Is it okay, Samed?" my mother hissed, the act of speaking clearly causing her pain. Her voice had taken on a gravelly, tattered aspect that meant that when she spoke, her voice seemed to have more of a texture than sound. I answered that it was. Then she instructed me to use a spoon that lay by my knee to take 2 spoonfuls worth of water and drink it. I was then to give my sister the same measure, and if I could balance it, carefully bring 1 spoonful to her. I did as she asked. As I carefully crept with the spoon of water for Mother, she told me that this was now our most precious thing. "The important thing now," she said, wincing and screwing her eyes tightly shut with each word. "The most important thing for us is to be brave and to save as much water as we can. Soon they will come to find us. Then we will be safe. But until then, we need to stay here and be brave. You are a big boy now. I can't move, so you will need to look after the water for your sister. I need you to only take 2 spoonfuls, no more, and make sure your sister takes the same. Do you understand?" I nodded yes, and holding the handle as firmly as possible, poured the single spoon of water into my mother's mouth. The moisture, when it touched her lips, made them look black against the thick layer of grey dust that coated her face. Though I didn't realize it at the time, this rationing of our water supply would be essential to our surviving, and my mother was, even then, preparing for the long haul. I settled down beside her, determined that I would show her just how brave I could be. Night fell, and as it did, it dragged the temperature down with it. The space in which my mother, my sister, and I were trapped was around 6 feet long by 4 feet wide. From the tiled floor to the ceiling, formed by the underside of the table, was around 3 feet. My mother, laying on her side, 1 foot disappearing beneath a huge slab of rock, was pinned in place. My sister huddled up against her, affording me a few feet to move, and by sliding on my belly to change directions. I could sit upright without my head touching the ceiling, but could not move much more than that. The small gap through which light spilled was at the end where my mother's head rested, and appeared like the tiny entrance to an underground cave. It also seemed to be very far above us. As night came, I too huddled into my mother, but I did not sleep. Every few minutes my mother would let out a cry to whomever might be walking or searching above. From our tomb, we had no way of knowing how far the devastation had spread, how far we were from the surface, or whether anyone in the surrounding area was even still alive. Yet she did not give up hope, and instead cried over and over, hoping and praying that someone above would eventually hear us and begin to dig. That first night, I was hopeful, and a few times when my mother called, I called too, adding my voice in the hope that our rescuers would hear our cries. Nobody did. The second day, I awoke to find my mother asleep, and for a horrible second I feared that she had died. It was only when I saw my sister's head still gently rising and falling on my mother's chest that I realized she was still breathing. That day was incredibly long. With every unanswered call for help, my belief that an answer would come at all began to deplete, as if my belief was a statue, and each unheeded call a chip taken with hammer and chisel from the hole. My mother, however, continued to call. Around midday, my sister, who until that point had been uncharacteristically quiet, asked tentatively what we were going to eat. My mother did not answer until many hours later, and then only to me. My sister didn't ask again. When night fell and we had eaten nothing, she already had her answer. "We have water," my mother told me flatly once my sister was sleeping. "Enough to last." She sighed deeply and gritted her teeth as she tried to shift her weight. "It will be the hunger that finds us," she whispered finally. It was that phrase, "the hunger that will find us," that touched me. As the 3rd, 4th, and 5th days went by, the words came to haunt me. Something in the way my mother used the phrase, "the hunger," the way she applied the definite article to the concept, twisted it from meaning the empty feeling in my belly to something else entirely. It sculpted and moulded the hunger into a thing with form, a dark, shadowy thing with limbs and eyes that in my 6-year-old mind was prowling somewhere above us. A thing I knew that would eventually find us, and in a strange perversion of the word's meaning, would eventually eat us. When I look back now, decades later, I think, perhaps, that it was my mind's way of dealing with the trauma, distracting from the very real peril that all three of us were in, the danger of suffocation, starvation, of being crushed by inventing some creature, some hunting thing that I could be scared of, my fear given a shape. That night, my mother continued to call, but I didn't help. For, whilst I wanted more than anything to be found, for some hero to hear our calls, there was part of me that didn't think the hero would hear us, that thought maybe there was no hero at all, only the shadowy villain. I was reluctant to call out for fear of the hunger, scared to alert it to our hiding place to give the predator a scent of its prey. That night, when my mother finally succumbed to exhaustion and slept, I looked up at the small tunnel of light above and prayed that it would remain intact, that this disk of light far above, that for us was practically the sun, would not be eclipsed by a creature stalking slowly before it. With both my mother and sister asleep, and the cold of the floor tiles seeping with insidious slowness into my bones, I remained awake and alert, listening through the awful silence, over our muffled and laboured breathing, for movement. Movement above or to the side, fast or controlled and cautiously slow. I strained my ears, struggling to catch any shifting whisper of a something lighter than a shadow, stretching through gaps toward me. I pictured it, black, pulled and warped, malformed like the shadows that once danced on our walls that had fallen, collapsed, and yet still sealed us in. The air beneath the table became thick, heavy with stagnant breath, exhalations inhaled anew, hot and full, sodden with moisture but sparse on air. I began to breathe more quickly, gasping to feel a full breath, a clean, cool inhalation that would fill my lungs and nourish my body. Instead, the air seemed stale and empty. I felt a pressure, heavy as a lead weight, pushed down upon my chest as the walls of my prison, already so narrow, seemed even then to shrink. Perhaps, I thought, this was a tomb. Perhaps we were already dead, and the hunger would come like the worms of the grave to feed upon those below ground, because, after all, was that not what we now were? I looked again to the light, scouring its edges for a flicker of something, wrapped and enclosed even within the confines of this space in my own smaller, private hole. Terrified of something my mind had invented and yet for which I now searched the horizon. Then, a sound. At first, it was quiet, like the subtle rising of a breeze through leaves, but then louder. It's coming, I thought, from above, directly above. I raised my head and glared at the underside of the table as something scratched against the surface above, as if trying to scrape, burrow, and claw its way through. How, I thought, when the rubble lay against the surface, could anything be up there, trying like a dog digging up a bone to root down through the table to the food that lay below. I felt my entire body stiffen. The scratching grew louder, and I knew it was not in my head. There was something up there. I curled myself small, tight into a ball, knowing even then that my mother, pinned as she was, would be powerless to help when it came to drag me away. The next day, I awoke with a gnawing emptiness inside of me. Despite my thirst, I still took only the prescribed amount from the jar and administered the same helping to my sister. I wondered how, being much larger than us, my mother was surviving on her meager ration, and after some discussion she agreed to take a second spoonful. It had become increasingly hot within our tomb, and it occurred to me that none of us had needed to use the toilet since the earthquake days ago. Nothing came out, because nothing had gone in. I was about to question my mother about this when the thought was interrupted by a low, groaning sound to my left. The next thing I felt was my mother, once again gripping me, though this time by the collar and wrenching me backwards. There was a loud and shattering crack as one leg of the table, standing in the corner opposite my mother's head, collapsed. The surface of the table in that corner folded in. After a moment, the other leg on the same side imploded and a huge cloud of dust rose up. Our small rectangle of sanctuary had shrunk even further and was now a triangular wedge. As the dust cleared and I gazed at the space, now closed, where I had moments earlier been sitting, I felt a wave of biting nausea and fear. Not only for the version of myself that might not have moved so quickly, might not have, yet again, been rescued by my mother, but for the realization that had it been the other side of the table that had collapsed, my mother would be no more. A thing people do not discuss about starvation is the quiet it creates. Once it finishes with your fat reserves, when it begins to feast on the proteins and your muscles, it also chews upon your words, swallowing your desire to speak so that your voice, your very will to speak, simply vanishes, consumed by your hunger. After that second collapse, I did not speak or even move again for the rest of the day. Days passed exactly the same. I know that there must have been differences, that I must have endured each second, marked the time in some way, but after the fifth or sixth, they melted together, one the same as the next, and in the pit of my bowels the churning grip of emptiness continued to writhe like an eel. Still, I counted the nights, knowing that with each nightfall, it came closer to finding us. Again, the sounds above. Scratching at the surface of the table, just above our heads, the sound I knew of taloned hands, clawing, trying to break through, penetrate into this hideout, to find and consume whatever it found inside. I stared up at the light, the surface so far and high above as across its bright, angelic face, I saw something move. At that moment, shivering with cold, exhaustion and fear, for the first time, I began to cry. My mother, woken by my sobs, gripped me tightly. "Don't worry, baby," she whispered softly. "I won't let it get you. I won't." Still, I didn't close my eyes or imagine how she could stop it, even if she wanted to. On what I thought was the 10th day, my sister would not awake. When she finally did, she would remain conscious for only a few minutes at a time. That night, my mother wrapped her arms around me again and promised, "I won't let it get you, Samid. Either of you. I swear that I won't." She paused, and after a long time, in a low voice that was almost a whisper, she said, "Remember this feeling, my boy, my darling love. This will be the last time I ever hold you like this." I did, and it was. 3 days later, the light above us grew. At first, just a little, but then in large, greedy chunks. Light flooded through the gap and stung our eyes with its brightness. Voices could be heard, and I knew it was over. The moments of the rescue were a little like the first seconds of the earthquake. a strange, rubbery blur as my mind clawed through files and references to understand what was happening, eventually landing on the answer: we, my mother, my sister, and I, were free. Some will of course ask, if my mother survived, then why was that night, pinned on our sides, the last time she ever held me in her arms? The simple answer is, because it was the last time she was able to. When rescuers asked how my mother lost her arm, she spoke in tears of rats. How some rodent would have managed to creep into that space to feed upon a limb was never called into question, and my sister and I, grateful to be alive, would never have called her a liar. Some mothers will do anything to ensure the safety of their children. My mother ensured that the hunger didn't get us. She gave a part of herself to make sure we didn't starve, and we accepted it gladly. It was only years later that I realized the scratching I had heard, that I had thought was coming from above, was not the hunger trying to get in, but was in fact my mother, in feverish desperation, sharpening the edge of the spoon. The Edge of Hollyfield. Chapter 1. Hollyfield. This place felt, in Stacy Miller's words, like watching paint dry. It was sad enough that she was born here. Everything seemed like it was pulled out of some mundane book. A bore, she called it. To her, living here was just pure torture. She had had enough of the place. Hollyfield was a beautiful place. It had the usual look of a town with a mix of forestry and nondescript buildings. All the houses looked the same, cozy and average with the picket fences and gates, some with manicured lawns and gardens. It was the only place she had ever known, unfortunately. Being the kind of person she was, isolated and self-absorbed, but with a curiosity that she couldn't stifle, she wanted nothing but to know more about the world outside her town. Where else would she go? Why would she go? Could she even go? Of course not. She was a 16-year-old brunette with eyes to match who lived with her quite odd parents. No siblings to entertain her. She lived like everything that was going to happen, happened. Of average height, modest stature, and with no care for any of that, Stacy kept modest time away for herself, with her house with no neighbors kind of home and dress me I don't care kind of wardrobe. Stacy barely had any close friends. Acquaintances, but nothing more. Stacy walked with a dark cloud over her thoughts. She did not hate her town. She just didn't know where to place her feelings about Hollyfield. Hollyfield. Did the two words have to be separated? One of the little things that bugged Stacy. Many things bugged her, influencing the moody delight she was. Ultimately weird, but a delight. Or so she thought. Stay in there for the entire holidays for all I care. I understand how you feel. Just bring out your laundry, Mrs. Miller said from behind Stacy's bedroom door. Mrs. Miller. There was something Stacy detested about her mother. It was like she never understood the solid and sacred meaning of privacy. There had been countless times that Stacy had made her feelings known to her mother, but she never seemed to understand, and sometimes her mother took it out of hand. Like now. I know you feel terrible about what happened, but you know you can't stay in forever. Stacy dashed off her bed and opened the door. I said for the last time, Mom. Stress leaked into her voice. Nothing happened that day. Would you just stop? Your laundry? Her arm outstretched. With a sigh, a hand on the door and the other reaching into the space near the entrance of her room, Stacy retrieved a small basket of clothes and thrust it into her mother's hands, slamming the door. Walking deeper into the shrine she termed her room, Stacy plopped on her bed and recalled the events that caused her mother to be as annoying as she was right now. Stacy considered Tristan Pierce, a teen in her class, as a too good-looking for his age kind of guy. She liked the way he was with people. Popular, of course. His attitude, his height, smile, everything about him Stacy liked. In her proud mind, she allowed herself to develop a liking that she had never had for any other person. She thought she could let him in her own little world. No one knew about her crush. Only her mother. The last person she needed to know about her feelings. But things had to go on, right? So Stacy was walking to the parking lot one Friday evening from school to wait for her father. But right behind the principal's car, against a nearby wall, Stacy saw the unmistakable physique of her crush. He could just be standing there alone, on his phone, with his earpieces in his ears, or with one of his friends. She could talk to him. Well, he wasn't alone or with one of his friends with earpieces stuck in his ears. He was well on his way to showing Amelia Kirst, the redhead in Stacy's class, just how good Stacy thought his lips were. "Oh, baby!" Mrs. Miller's voice was loud enough to be heard by the lovebirds, as well as Stacy herself. She was right there in her car with a dramatic... Chapter 2. The Two Arguing Men. That day did make Stacy unhappy like any normal teenage girl. But Stacy could not be that way for too long. She was Stacy Miller. She did not care too much about things like this. Stoic, reserved, silent and moody Stacy Miller. Hollyfield has never known such a citizen. By the side of the road with her hands behind her back, Stacy walked along the edge of town, thinking about what ground her nerves. Her mother and her annoying ways. The mind-numbing irritation she felt for Tristan Pierce, or what on earth she could do today apart from staying in her room all day with a mood as thick as rain clouds. She could hear rain somewhere far away. A low rumble of thunder sounded deep in the clouds above her, and the wind blew hard on the trees. Her footsteps were louder, and the grass whistled as the wind howled. Stacy looked up, and back down at her shoes. They were trainers, the softest pair she owned. She looked around. She had wandered quite a long way from her home. Now she was at the very edge of town that had very few houses. Houses that had been vacant for as long as she could remember. One of them had a broken mailbox and a rickety gate. Another wasn't even painted. A third had fallen into disrepair. Each house had a problem with it. No wonder the place looked almost abandoned. Wasn't she supposed to be at the park? Or the field behind her home? Stacy sighed. Sometimes she did not even know why she was the way she was. As she turned, she noticed two adult men talking to each other. Red-faced, they were talking loud, arguing even. The two men were standing in front of the worst-looking house, albeit a house that still seemed okay enough to live in. One of the men had his back to a closed door, arms folded as if he lived there, and the other stood in front of him. He was a tall and lanky man whose temper seemed larger still. His voice could barely be heard as he pointed fiercely at the man who looked emotionless at the door. Stacy wondered, how did she not notice them sooner? The shouting man's voice had increased several decibels now, and she could hear him quite clearly. But it could not leave Stacy's mind that she had been so carried away with thinking about nothing in particular that she had not noticed the two men who argued just a little way from her. She was standing right near the house watching the men. The two adults did not seem to notice her, too caught up in their anger. Stacy thought that they could not see her. So, Stacy, being just who she was, slowly backed away to hide behind a large bush. She was well hidden. After making sure she was as invisible as she made herself to be in school and everywhere else, she listened. "Why on earth would you do that to me? I stressed to get here in time to get that machine, but now you tell me this? I travelled 6 hours to get here. What do you mean I can't have it now? I will sue you for this. I swear you will regret it. I never should have trusted that immoral site. Never should have trusted you." Stacy could hear the lanky man shout. From the corner of her eye, Stacy could see the curtains of a window in another house open. She turned her head away from the fighting and looked toward the window. She could see the pale white curtain parted at the corner, but she could not make out the face. Stacy, without a doubt, thought this place creepy. She would have left or run away as fast as she could from the arguing men and creepy surroundings. But what on earth would she do when she got to somewhere less creepy? With a defiant thought against going back to her boring home, a prisoner to her own thoughts, she bent even lower to hide herself more in the bush. She looked back to the shouting men, but now they were gone. Stacy frowned. How could they have gone? She looked back to the window, but now the curtain was closed. As Stacy stood back up in her usual irritation, she heard a strained grunt from the house that the two men had argued at just seconds before. With a frown, Stacy walked back home. Chapter 3. The Order. What would you want to eat now? We have nothing else at home. I told you I couldn't go to the store today. We practically did nothing throughout today. We had enough time, Stacy said, slamming the door of the fridge. Baby, Mrs. Miller started again, visibly stressed. But Stacy was having none of it. She was mad at her mother this time. She never did anything during the day. She never even really took care of Dad. She paid too much attention to Stacy, and the person who truly needed help was Dad. He was extremely sick. Stacy seemed to grow angry with her mother more and more each day. And the worst thing, to Stacy, was her mother did not even think for once that she was wrong in some way. Darling, please, I have been feeling terrible all day. I don't think I am fine. Please, manage what we have right now. I promise I will get you something from the store when I can. Please, darling. You feel terrible? What? The person who has always felt terrible is Dad. You have never paid attention to him, Stacy said with shock, her eyes filling up with tears. Stacy. No, Mom. She looked back to her father. I'm so sorry, Dad, but I have to go. I've lost my appetite. Mrs. Miller watched her daughter go and let out a heavy sigh. With stinging eyes, she put her head on the kitchen table and cried. In Stacy's room, Stacy sat on her bed and opened her laptop. She had to check again. It had been too long now. She'd saved up enough and she knew it was time to get it. She got her internet connection going and typed into the search bar, Craigslist.org. One of the two windows in her bedroom blew open with great force. It had gotten windy. Stacy immediately stood up and locked it. Her teeth chattered. The temperature had dropped too. She sat back in her seat and continued her search. She clicked on her country and state and moved on to the next category, the sales category. She moved to the search bar. Camera, she typed in. She clicked on lowest price and was directed immediately to a picture of an old yet neat camera. A hand was holding the contraption. It was a small hand. Its pale skin looked to hold the camera in a death grip, like the seller did not want to sell the device. She moved the mouse upwards and clicked reply. She did not even wait to read the description. After reading how ridiculously cheap the thing was, she sent a message to the seller. Good evening. I like your camera. It's at a good price. Is there anything I need to know about it? Stacy sighed and prepared to wait for a reply. But she did not have to. A reply had already come. Before she could wonder why it came so fast, her brain processed the information she got. Yes, your address? The person was looking to deliver. But she had asked what about the camera, and got no reply to that. Anyway, she thought it was a dumb question since the description was there in the first place. Your address? The seller insisted. Stacy quickly typed in her address. The minute she typed it in, a knock sounded on her bedroom door. Mom, go away, I'm busy. Mrs. Miller pushed the door open anyway. Darling, I am sorry, She stopped and squinted at words on the laptop. What are you doing? She said, her eyes widening as her brain processed the information she read. I'm ordering something online, Stacy said, standing up to block her mother's view. Craigslist? Her mother whispered, and as she did, her eyes grew dark and anger filled her senses. The reason Stacy had put off buying a camera for weeks was because of her mother. Another thing to annoy Stacy about her mother. Having heard all the things that one could possibly hear about the site, Mrs. Miller had always warned her daughter about Craigslist. The site had many unknown people, buying stuff from just anybody without even seeing their faces. The very thing that got the sweet and nice Mrs. Miller raging like a bull.
I told you so many times, Stacy, that this place is dangerous. You can't just give anyone our address. And Craigslist? Are you serious? Stacy!
It's my money. I just wanted to get a camera.
And you could not get it at the store?
Stacy had nothing else to say. Mrs. Miller was only being protective of her daughter. She had heard about this immoral site. It was the reason something in her life went wrong. Her friend and her brother. The people you buy stuff from and don't see their faces or know who they truly are. They could be just anybody. You never know who they could turn out to be in the end. Something her 16-year-old daughter failed to realize. Chapter 4. The Camera. I'm just going to get the camera and he'll be on his way, Dad. At least, I think it's a he. He was going to be a delivery man that was delivering her camera. That was all. He's going to give me something to sign and he's going to hand over to me my camera. Mom doesn't have to be so worried. She doesn't know that not all people are mean. She has to understand that too, sometimes. I love her to death, Dad, but she should also understand that I like to have my space, especially with you. I hate it when she talks about you the way she does. It makes me mad. I don't know why she does that. Walking into the room, her mother began.
Stacy, I'm going to the store. I have to get you what you want for tonight.
Mrs. Miller smiled at her daughter. The saddest smile Stacy ever saw on her mother's face.
Please, darling, stay safe for me and your dad,
Mrs. Miller said with a shaky and heavy sigh as she ran her hand through Stacy's hair. After her mother had left, Stacy talked to her dad about what she could do with the camera when it got to the house. And as she described it, a knock sounded on the door. It was here. Stacy rushed to open the door with immense happiness. She had wanted this camera for ages now. She opened the door. The sky was dark and looked like it was about to rain. The winds blew hard and the trees rustled with complaints. She came face to face with a pale woman. Her skin had little bruises on it, and her eyes were sunken pits. Frail, very frail. Her hair was bedraggled. A rat's nest. Stacy, as indifferent as she was towards fashion and how one looks when he or she goes out, thought with horror how someone could come out in public looking this way. Stacy's eyes drifted outside to look behind the woman who continually stared at her. Stacy saw no one in sight. Of course, why would she see anyone? People weren't around at this time of the year. They either travelled to meet family or went on vacation. Stacy could not help but feel weird about this. Why would anyone want to look like this? She looked tortured and starved. Tortured and starved so much that Stacy could still not give in to the thought of everything being all right. Something did not feel right. She looked down at the woman's hands. She remembered. One of these was the same hand holding the camera in the picture she saw on Craigslist. This woman in front of her held out a brown package. The woman stretched out her arms and said in the croakiest voice Stacy had ever heard, "An order for Miss Stacy Miller." The woman looked to be in her late 20s, but Stacy wasn't sure. Her tired eyelids were so drawn down that her eyes could barely be seen through them. They looked like she'd never slept. Her mouth was as drawn as her eyelids, her lower lip revealing a little bit of her lower teeth. That's me," Stacy stammered and reached for the package. But as she took a hold of it, she could not get it out of the other woman's hand. And in the same croaky voice, the woman said with her dead eyes as wide as saucers, "Look inside, please. I beg. Can the car? I beg. The cat won't
Leave it alone. I beg you. Look inside. I want to ride since the bag of carrots."
What? Stacy thought. What was she talking about? Stacy could not understand her statement. She felt a jumble of things. She felt stressed, pity, scared. She felt curious. Terror overtook them all. What was this woman trying to say? But before she could ask anything, the woman turned and ran away on her thin and shaky legs while saying with a lot of breath and urgency in her wild eyes, "I've stayed too long. I've stayed too long." Chapter 5. Pictures. Looking at the camera, Stacy admired the structure of the old design of the thing. She still could not forget the look on the strange woman's face as she ran away from her home. It was haunting and scary. What could she be talking about? Stacy thought. Look inside, Stacy recalled out loud. She stared at the camera and she turned it around. Look inside. What could she probably find in the camera? Pictures? But what kind of pictures? She just bought... Wait, she hadn't even paid for the camera. Oh no! How was she going to get the money? I couldn't keep it when I haven't paid for it. But as it happened, Stacy wasn't going to worry about payments for long, because the moment she looked at the camera, all thoughts of money vanished. All that she saw on the old camera were pictures. Pictures of her mother walking in a silent part of town, the rundown part of town where the men had argued. She saw pictures that showed her mother being pulled into a house, the house where the curtains had opened, with no face peering through them. Stacy was filled with horror. So horrified was she that the tears couldn't stop. She screamed at the thought of her mother tied up somewhere, abducted. Her mother was abducted. Stacy, with tears in her eyes, looked at the camera and saw the last picture. It was a note. Come to the edge of town. Let's play. I shouldn't have gone there, Stacy screamed. A certain pain shot across her forehead. It hurt so much that she had to sit down. I shouldn't have gone there. Tears still falling. She had to go there again. She had to. She could not leave her mother. Even if she disliked her mother at times, she loved her mother too much to leave her alone. Don't worry, Dad. I'll get her back. I will find her, Stacy said and walked out the door with the camera in her hand. Alone in the dark room, with her hands bound behind her, Mrs. Miller could not stop thinking about the medicine that had been taken away from her. She got dizzier by the second. Any more thoughts about her daughter all alone at home with no idea that her mother might not come back to see her again worsened matters. She's only 16. She still doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't understand. She still talks to her father. Her father! She's not crazy. No, my baby! Let me out! She screamed, but nothing was heard. Pin drop silence. It was like no one was there. Or it was like they were all there, with her in the room. She could not know for sure. Stacy ran through the town without stopping to take a breath. The people she passed watched her go, and some even asked questions on what troubled her, but it was like she had gone deaf. She could not hear a thing. She ran to the edge of town and saw them, the houses. Without thinking, she ran into one of them. In it was a big black couch with one woman on it. The couch faced away from the front door where Stacy stood. Stacy grew mad and threw the camera at the back of the couch. It broke into 100 pieces. "Where is my mother?" she yelled, her left eyelid twitching. Her eyes were red with tears and her hands were sweaty with fear. Who was this woman? So strange, Stacy thought to herself. Even if she could only see the back of her head, Stacy knew this was no ordinary woman. Chapter 6. I'll Say. You came, the voice of the woman said. It was croaky like the woman that came earlier that day, but there were more hints of femininity in this voice, and more cruelty.
Where is my mother?"
Without warning, the woman stood. She was ridiculously tall. Her hair was boned straight and looked wet. It was hard to compare which was thinner in both her arms and waist. She wore a tight black dress and seemed to shake a little bit, like her bones could fall apart any moment. The thin woman turned around, and Stacy saw her face. Stacy's mouth opened wide. She could not believe what she was seeing. The woman had no jaw, and her tongue fell in the space there. Saliva dripped down into her black dress. Her eyes held a dead look to them, like the delivery woman. Suddenly, she screamed at Stacy, who fell back to the floor with fear. Stacy began to tremble. Who were these people, and what were they doing in Hollyfield? Stacy thought. She terribly wanted to get out of there. What creature was this? Her mother was somewhere in the edge of this town. How could she find her? Suddenly, the woman stopped. She shakily walked back to the couch and sat down, mumbling, "When he comes, I'll have my pay." When who comes? Stacy's curiosity peaked for that second above her fear. The woman stopped mumbling for a few seconds, but it was only a few before she started again. This time, it was in the crooked and weird way the delivery woman spoke. "See, I'll kill you, mumbler, dirty old coot. He says, she says, I say. Listen, dirty Mr. Do I know, nylons and frogs black they say. I'll say," the creature muttered. Stacy huddled in one corner of the room. The sharp pain she felt in her head when she was at her home came again. She had to find her mother. "Blast this head and hers. Do not, he says, I will say." The creature scratched her face, and all the way from the couch, blood spilled as close as could be near Stacy. She had to get out of here now. "Where do you think you're going?" the creature yelled with the croakiest voice imaginable. Stacy didn't have time to wonder how the thing had read her mind. As Stacy stood to get out of the house, the creature got up. With lightning speed, its head made a complete turnaround to face her. Stacy almost fainted from fear, but she picked herself up and ran out the door. The creature screamed after her, her thin knees knocking together as hard as they could. Stacy ran into the next house, all her breath gone from her lungs, and slammed the door shut. The voice of the creature gone. Stacy closed her eyes and took huge breaths. She'd made it. Now to find her mother. A grunt could be heard from upstairs. Stacy's eyes were still closed. Somewhere deep in her mind, Stacy wondered if she would see anything when she opened her eyes. Her breath was still labored, and her eyes felt heavy with stress. A tear made its way past her eyelid, the flashing pain making its way across her forehead again. She felt heat all around her. Her hair stuck to her face. She had to do this. But what could be there when she opened her eyes? She opened them, and regretted it instantly. Right in front of her sweaty face were puppet-like faces that grinned and frowned deeply at her, each having different expressions from the others. The room was filled with their dull and haunting colours. They were so close to her she could explain the reason for her laboured breathing. So lifelike were they that she almost fainted from fear. She loved the horrific books she read, but had never wanted it to come this far. Without hesitation, she opened the door and ran off to the house right beside the creepy one she just left. But before she entered, she thought, what would be inside this one? Chapter 7. A Myth. The sky was darker now, and the wind blew harder. It was cold and almost night, and she still hadn't found her mother. She ran into the woods, the pain in her head getting worse by the second. All she had done was accidentally wander into an argument at the end of town. She knew she was supposed to run away and not listen, but she didn't. Her curiosity destroyed her. All she wanted was her camera, something to make her happy when no one else would. Not her mother, not Tristan Pierce, and not even her father. So upset was Stacy Miller that she didn't stop running. Even if the voice of her mother told her to stop and the voice of her father told her to keep running, she didn't stop to look. She had said it. She hated Hollyfield. There was a reason she did so. She did not stop running when the croakiest voices she had ever heard in her life screamed at her from behind. She saw faces and heard voices that haunted her as the forest let her run deeper into it. Now, people from the neighbouring towns barely visited the ghost town Hollyfield. Whenever it was mentioned, the people remembered the haunting of the poor girl who had a terrible mental problem that deceived her into thinking her dead father was still alive. It all started with an order on Craigslist. The myth says that when anyone went on Craigslist, the mysterious entities from the edge of Hollyfield got to work of pretending to be potential sellers. Then, when one sent an address, the whole story began again. It is said that when any daredevil ventured into the ghost town, that person either left with a remarkable story to tell, or were never seen again. The story would include the sighting of a girl in jeans and soft padded trainers and wet black hair with dead eyes, mumbling something about dead fathers and lost mothers. Insta-scare. My mum had this party in Hawaii and it was so amazing. Did you see my posts on Insta? Layla heard Joanne say as she walked through the hallways. I definitely saw, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs because those pictures were cute, Esther replied. Did you check out Grace's page? She replied. They visited Venice Beach. They? Who is they? Esther raised an eyebrow. You can't mean... Who else? She and Jason. There was this picture where she had just a bikini on and Jason's packs were fire. Sometimes I wish Mac was more masculine. Joanne said right before she slammed her locker door and walked towards chemistry class. Can't these people go a day without talking about their silly pictures? Layla said under her breath with her hands clutching her backpack. As she walked through the hallway, her locker seemed farther away with every step closer. Slowly, the walls began to close in and the ground opened. Layla could see nothing but black, the purple paint now cold, black, the tiles the same. The people in the hall morphed into obsidian gooey aliens, and the entire hallway spiraled in circles. Layla! Stacy screamed, and Layla jittered out of her imagination. Yeah, what's up? What's up? What's up is me trying to get your attention for the past hour. Stacy, we've not even been in school for an hour, Layla replied. Well, it's been 30 seconds, but it feels like an hour because you got me screaming. I'm sorry? So, I'm used to dark outfit Layla, but this dark conversation Layla has to be a new upgrade, Stacy said regarding Layla's disinterest. My choice of outfit is my problem, Stacy, Layla replied. Yeah, I know, that's why you wear black every day of every year and your Instagram looks like darkness mixed with grief and a hint of depression. Can we just get to chemistry class? Layla diverted. Yes, ma'am. The closing bell sounded, and as Layla walked over to her mum's car, she had a hunch that she was going to get scolded. Hey, Mum, she said, right before she got into the car. Hey, baby, how was school? Tracy asked. Same old, Mom. Okay, Layla, we need to talk about this. Oh boy, here we go again, Layla scoffed. I really need you to tell me what's wrong. Mom! No, honey, I'm worried. We need to talk about this. I notice the stairs when we visit the mall or even take walks around the park. Your teachers complain of your social skills and, Layla, baby, you have no coloured clothes. Not even one. Since when did having a favourite colour become a world issue? Layla asked and looked away from the window. Layla, you own only black clothes and it is a problem. My favourite colour is purple, but you don't see my entire wardrobe filled with only purple clothes. So big a problem that you took your daughter to a therapist. Yeah, Parent of the Year award goes to you, all right. Her mom slammed on the brakes then, unconcerned about the traffic.
Can you blame me? Layla, can you blame me? You have a room full of creepy posters with writings like, "You're alone in this world. Your life is dark and empty and without love. Family means nothing. And you expect me not to worry? You've never been affectionate, you've never had a crush, and of course, you're a blonde with black hair."
It's called dye, Mother.
It's called strange, Tracy replied, putting her foot down on the gas again.
Anyways, Stacy wants to come over, and I know you're working a night shift, so I was wondering, is it okay if she does? Layla didn't bother to face her mom, and continued to stare out of the window.
Of course she can. How do I say no to the only friend my teenage daughter has?
A yes would have sufficed.
And a crush is all I'm asking, Layla, or at least an Instagram page with cute pictures and not dark, hollow pictures.
Mom, my social media is my private space. You shouldn't be snooping. The disappointment harsh in her words, the last words before they pulled up on their drive. The second Tracy turned off the ignition, Layla raced through the living room, up the stairs and into her bedroom. She threw her backpack on the floor of her room, slammed the door, then hurried over to her closet. She took out a pair of sweatpants, a tank top, and she sat by her desk to record yet another horrible school experience in her diary. As Layla had her pen to paper, her phone chimed. Jason Moore just posted a video.
Why do you do this to yourself, Layla? Post notifications for a guy who is never going to look at you.
She opened her Instagram to play the video.
Yo guys, it's your boy Jason Moore, and I'm here with my friend Grace,
Jason said, and rolled his eyes at the end as if he was waiting for what Grace had to say.
Friend? Sorry to bust y'all's single Pringles bubbles, but I'm his girlfriend. He seemed to have omitted the girl in the front.
Grace replied.
I love you, baby. I love you too,
she replied.
So guys, it's the beginning of a new school year, and guess what?
Said Jason.
We're seniors!
Jason and Grace screamed in a synchronized manner. Layla could take no more, so she stopped the video from playing any further. It was barely a minute, and he had over 1,000 views and a little above 500 likes. Layla could tell from his location that he was in his father's private beach in Manhattan. Aside from Grace and Jason's absence in all their classes today, this was the information she needed to seal her hunch. Layla took a little nap in her room of death, and she woke up to 10 missed calls from Stacy. Just as she was about to return them, Stacy rang Layla again.
Did somebody die? Layla asked as she answered the call.
Yes, your personality.
I'm laughing so hard I'm peeing my pants, Layla said with a bland expression.
I just wanted to, let you know that, you remember our study date? Well, it's a party now.
What? Girl, a party? Why? For who? And most importantly, where? Layla jumped off her desk.
Well, why? Because why not? Everyone in our class is invited, and, well, it's happening at your house.
No, Stacy, no.
It's only going to...
No!
Last an hour?
No!
Layla, come on, you should...
No, she interrupted again.
Would you at least hear me out?
With a sigh, she said, Fine.
Thank you. You should think about it, Layla. Even though it's too late to reconsider. The drinks and the music, snacks and invitations, they've all been sent out.
Stace, why would you do this?
Because Jason promised to come.
How can he? He's in Manhattan.
No, he's not. Where did you hear that from?
He posted a video today and his location read Manhattan.
But he's in town?
So he lied about his location, Layla scoffed.
Or the video may just be old. Anyways, get ready, cause the party starts in an hour.
Why are you doing this to me?
One last thing. Don't wear black.
You know that's not possible.
I was hoping it would be.
A party? A party with Jason Moore in her house? What was she going to do? Why did Stacy have to pull this on her? It was too late to change what happened, so the best she could do was make sure she looked good enough to be noticed. She scanned through her wardrobe, and for the first time ever, Layla did wish she had clothes that were not black or made of leather. She scavenged her clothes and she found a fit she was comfortable with. It was a knee-high boot, short leather skirt, and a black bralette. She pulled out a net pop sock and she washed out her black dye, revealing her blonde hair. The last touch was makeup, and instead of her gothic look, she looked more like a character in a fairy tale movie. Time flew so fast as Layla prepared for the party that she didn't realize it was an hour past. Layla, I'm on my way to the hospital. There are leftovers in the microwave. Finish up your schoolwork and please clear those dishes, Tracy said after a subtle knock on Layla's door. Okay, Mom. You can close my door now. I know that wasn't for me, she replied. I'm sorry, I meant to say I completely understand and I'll get right on it the second you leave. Nice save and nice try. Get up, Layla, and let me see your behind as you walk to the kitchen. Yes, Mum. Hold on, am I hallucinating or is your hair blonde again? I just wanted to try something different. Is that makeup? You know what? Don't even answer that. If I wasn't certain Stacy was your only friend, I would be worried. Layla grabbed her headphones and grudgingly walked into the kitchen. The second she wiped the last plate, the doorbell rang. Her heart skipped a beat. The startle sent her phone right into the sink with water filled with soap lather. Oh shit! Layla winced as she brought her phone out of the sink. No. What was that? Nothing, Mum. I thought you'd left. Yeah, my ride just got here. She reached for her coat. Have fun with Stacy, honey. Bye, Mum. Come on, please turn on, Layla screamed, tapping her phone. Layla! Holy shit, where... Huh? I can't even see you. Where are you? I'm outside! Open the door! Of course you are. Open the door, girl! The party just began! Stacy screamed as she walked in with speakers and a crowd of horny teenagers. You do know my mum literally just walked out that door, right? What if she saw? Layla panicked. Relax, we waited for her to leave the driveway. Where's your phone? We need to take a selfie. I dropped it in the sink by accident. Oh, Layla. Let's use mine because you look too hot not to be captured. The pictures came out amazing. So amazing that Layla logged into her Instagram page with Stacy's phone. She captioned it, "In my feelings," and the location Layla thought best was home with the monsters. The party was off to a good start, but Layla wasn't having any fun. She kept staring at her phone all night, hoping it would come on, but with every minute that passed, she lost more hope. Attention everybody, senior year is ours, and what better way to start off than a crazy party? Stacy screamed into the microphone in her hand. Her screams seemed to echo and return from the crowd. Hey, have you seen Stacy? Living room. Damn, Layla. Never knew you were this hot and this party is off the roof. Yeah, thanks. She tucked her phone into her back pocket, and as she walked into her living room, she knew exactly why she wasn't having fun. Forgetting her phone, the lights were too bright and the music was too loud. Stace, Layla called out to her friend, who was with the DJ. Hey boo, what's good? You need to shut down this party, Layla said this time, a lot closer to Stacy. Why? Well, because Jason isn't even here. You mean Jason Moore? A masculine voice asked. Yes, and... Hold on. Stace, did that answer come from you? Nope. So if you didn't say it, then it means... Layla said as she turned around and saw Jason smile back at her. Hey, Layla, Jason replied. Oh my god. Layla shrieked and stumbled into the pack of wires lying on the ground. Her phone fell out of her back pocket and into the coiled wires. Layla's foot unplugged the wires from the socket, killing the music, and her left hand sent the cup of punch in Stacy's hands crashing into the jumbled wires. The only thing left to get to the ground was Layla, because she tripped from turning around to see Jason, but he broke her fall with his hands. All of these things happened with the DJ, Jason, Layla, and Stacy witnessing the electrical sparks from the wire and the mini explosion. Damn, are you okay? Jason asked. Yeah, I'm good. Just when I was starting to enjoy the party, Jason teased. Well, I don't know, my phone, Layla stuttered. Huh? You lost me at, well, he replied. My phone, I dropped my phone. I never knew you were blonde, Layla. What? Just help me check the floor with my phone, please. You too, Stace. Of course, Jason replied as he went to his knees. You know, it's funny, because by now I would expect an angry mob, but... Oh, okay, spoke too soon, Stacy retracted. The stares, the murmurs, and the obvious displeasure that followed the stop of the music was worse than extra assignments and surprise tests. There was nothing anybody could do to revive the vibe, so the party was officially over. The entire room was deserted in the blink of an eye. Found it! Stacy screamed and simultaneously raised Layla's phone into the air. Don't touch it. It should be hot, Layla tried to warn. You should maybe have said that a little sooner, Stace replied right after the screams that sent Layla's phone crashing on the ground. Stace, just give it, Layla replied. Give it? Nah, there's no way I'm touching that thing. Oh, fine. I'll get it myself. Here, I'll help you. Jason gestured and he picked up the phone as though it was nothing. Thank you, but if I'm being very honest, I am officially getting a new phone. Absolutely, Stacy replied. Definitely, Jason added in unison. I just need your help with one last thing, Layla replied. Of course, he said. Help me dump it in the trash, she sternly said, and Stacy and Jason could not help but laugh hysterically at how aggressively the statement was made. It was a night to remember. Layla had to clean up, but she got help from Stacy. The only problem Layla had was how she was going to explain to Tracy the reason she was now phoneless. It was the middle of the night, and Layla woke up to find the phone she had dropped in the kitchen trash can lying comfortably on her room desk. What the hell? Layla said as she creeped out of bed and walked towards the desk. The screen kept flashing and repeatedly showed one of the pictures from Layla's Instagram page. This has to be a crazy dream, Layla said as she tiptoed closer to the desk. The image kept flashing, and it was a picture from spring break last year. Layla had a black gown on, and her location read 6 feet under. What the hell? Layla said as the image kept flashing. As she moved closer to the phone, she tripped on her old crooked rocking chair, and the screams Layla made were louder than the sound it gave off. But her picture kept flashing, and the memories from the day she took from that picture were ones that scared her. Okay, this has got to stop, Layla said as she got up, reached the phone, and dumped it into the trash can by her bedside. Creepy, she said, rolling her eyes and getting back into bed with the hope that she would wake up and realize it was all a dream. Layla went to sleep, and by morning she was certain it had been a dream. She scanned her entire room to ascertain that it was a dream, and the singular fact that her phone was not in the bin in her room, she had all the assurance she needed. Hey, Mum. Didn't know you would come home so early, Layla said as she walked down the stairs. Are you forgetting something? Right. Good morning, Mum. How was work? It was fine. Do you mind explaining why your phone was on the kitchen counter when I got back? I can explain, but I'm not sure you're going to believe me. Layla, what are you saying? I'm just wondering why you were without your phone. I know you are a very strange teenager, but not even you are strange enough to be without their phone. Huh? Layla, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. You mean you're not mad at me? Mad? Why should I be? Just take better care of your stuff, especially the ones that are expensive. That's all I'm asking. It could have been stolen. Did you see the phone? Like you actually saw it? Layla, I need to get some rest. Take your phone off the counter and please be ready in time for the school bus, Tracy said as she grabbed her cup of coffee and headed for the stairs. Okay, my mother has to be delusional because... What the hell? Layla's gaze fell on her phone. There were no scratches or burns on it. It was exactly the way it was before she dropped it into the sink. Okay, this can't be possible. How did this happen? How is this even possible? Layla muttered. The moment she unlocked the phone, Layla saw the same image flashing on her screen repeatedly. It was the day of her dad's funeral, and Layla could not but put her location as 6 feet under. How does this even happen? Turn off, turn off, turn off. Layla continued trying to stop the creepy image, but the harder she tried, the clearer it became. It was the start of the day, but it was Layla's nightmare come true. There was a blackout in the entire street. The PJs she had on when she walked down the stairs were gone, and the gown she wore in the image was now on her body. Fear began to ripen inside Layla. She hoped that her mother would come running down the stairs screaming her name, but she wasn't in luck because Tracy was wiped out. Layla's picture from her dad's funeral was still the only visible image and the only source of light in her house. "It's broad daylight. Why isn't it bright outside?" Layla asked as she walked outside her house. "Layla!" a disturbed voice screamed out loud. "What the?" Layla could only say before she started screaming back into her house. "Layla! You're going 6 feet under!" the voices continued, increasing in volume. The voices sounded ever closer, and Layla's hands began to shake. She attempted to close the front door, but the owners of the voices hastened after her. Layla could only get a glimpse of them, but she vividly remembered seeing them at her dad's burial. "Wake up, Layla," Layla told herself. "Layla, come out, pumpkin. It's your time to go 6 feet under." They doubled from the last time they spoke, and it was like an army of zombies and hypnotized humans were speaking. They closed in on Layla, and the door she was proud of closing fell like a pack of cards. "Layla, where are you?" they continued, and rummaged every corner of the house. Layla ran up the stairs and headed straight for Tracy's room. "Mum, wake up! Wake up!" she screamed. "Layla, what is it?" "Wake up, Mum, there's a blackout and there are weird creatures chanting my name and running after me downstairs," Layla said with a panic-filled voice. "Huh?" Tracy asked, removing her sleep mask. "Did you just hear a word I said?" "Yes, and I'm disappointed that you would make up such a ridiculous story to avoid going to school." "Ridiculous? Mother, it's the truth." "A blackout? Yeah, right. Layla, turn around. Every house in this towers, and even if they didn't, it's morning. The sun would make a good enough source of light," Tracy said, and fell back on her bed. "But Mum, I swear there were—" "Go get ready for school, Layla." Tracy slipped her sleep mask back on and continued her nap. Layla knew what she had just felt was too real to be a figment of her imagination. She carefully went back down the stairs because she was certain that whatever had come after her the first time was still there. The more she progressed, the more the silence in the house grew. It was really gone, and now there was no way she was going to explain to anyone how the picture changed her clothes, and a mob of strange weirdos chased her to the point where she peed her pants. "The strangest thing happened this morning," Layla said, slamming her locker door. "Jason called you?" Stacy asked with bulging eyes. "Calm down, Cupid. I wish," she replied as they walked down a hallway. "Okay, this is going to sound really crazy, but there was a blackout and a mob of strange people chanting my name. You remember the dress I wore for my dad's funeral?" "Yeah?" "The picture I took on that day, the one I posted on my Instagram page. It was just there. It kept on flashing until I had the dress on me." "What are you talking about?" "Remember my phone from yesterday?" "Yeah? Did you get in trouble for it?" "Look, it's like it never happened." Layla brought out her phone from her backpack. "Holy shit!" Stacy's books crashed to the floor. "Damn, this is crazy!" "One more thing. My hair is black again. I washed out the dye yesterday, remember?" "Okay, but it is impossible for me to have had enough time to buy the dye my hair, and get enough sleep for school, so no, I didn't do this myself." Layla clutched the phone in her hands. "No, no, no," Layla screamed, with tears rolling down her cheek as the blackout happened again. Stacy was gone. It was like she'd disappeared. On the phone was a different picture this time. It was one from Layla's pool party with Stacy. They were wearing bikinis, and the location of the picture was underwater. In a split second, the entire school was flooded. Layla ran through different classrooms and hallways to find the source of the flooding, but before she could get to the third room, the water was as high as her waist. She was resilient enough to keep on going, but without moving an inch, the water level was at Layla's shoulders. "Stacy! Stacy! Stacy!" Layla mumbled with water in her mouth, and by now the entire school was completely flooded. It was bad enough that there was water in every part of the school, but with the sharks and the crocodiles almost triple the number of students, it was a recipe for disaster. And it took no time for the disaster to begin. The sharks feasted on screaming youths, tearing them apart limb from limb. The crocodiles cracked and snapped bones of human beings like they were sticks of a broom. In less than a minute, the sharks and crocodiles had eaten enough to turn the water blood red. "Layla! Layla!" Stacy screamed underwater. "I'm right here," Layla responded. They both swam towards each other, and their hands were just about to meet before the water spiraled and began to drain out with everything in it. "What's happening?" Layla shouted. The water from the flood went right out the drain, and with it pieces of undigested bones. Layla was unconscious. Her body lay stiff, and when her eyes opened, she thought she was blind. She could see nothing but darkness. She tried to move her hands, but she couldn't. She tried her legs, but they were also confined. It was beginning to feel like she was locked in a box. She banged it repeatedly, but it wouldn't budge. It was the sounds from around her that made Layla realize where she was. "Welcome back, Layla. We told you we were going to take you 6 feet under." The same creepy voices sounded. Layla could scream no more. She watched as little insects and bugs, bullet ants and scorpion flies crawled all over her body and into her nose and ears in a shut, tight coffin. She looked around for anything to escape with, but she could see absolutely nothing. Layla reached for her phone to dial Stacy, but as she successfully pulled it out of her back pocket, it fell on the deck of the coffin. The third image began to flicker. It was a picture from an alien con Layla was forced to attend because of Stacy's little brother, and it was one of the numerous worst days she had had. It didn't occur to Layla at the time, but now it hit her. "No, no, no, please, no," Layla screamed the second she realized the location she'd tagged her picture. It was too late to plead, as the coffin Layla was in rolled out of place and down a hill till her body came flying out. She opened her eyes and she was in Monster Town, just like the location on her picture. Layla got off the floor and dusted her black jeans, the same ones she had on in the picture. As she turned around, the first thing her eyes met was a 3-headed figure with 8 legs and a crappy wing. She was initially more disgusted than scared until she saw one of its heads shoot out fire, another one breathe ice, and the last one a hailstorm. Layla ran as fast as she could. She tripped and slid off different pathways. She ran aimlessly around in circles, and whenever she stopped, she saw the creature reach out for her head. Layla tried to think of a way to outsmart it, but before she was even done thinking, there were 1,000 of the creatures. It had duplicated all around her, and she was wishing she was still in the coffin. Her phone chimed again, and from the outfit she had on, Layla knew her next location. Home with the Monsters was the last location Layla had posted. It was the party Stacy had organized, and she had blonde hair, a black bralette, leather skirt, and knee-high boots. Just like Stacy vanished from the hallway, Layla was at home with the monsters she ran away from, except this time there were others. There was one with the head of a lion and the body of a snake. There was another that looked like the combination of a dinosaur and a giraffe. It was bizarre, and Layla had to turn away from them. But the moment she took a step on the stairs, the creepy creatures picked her up and ripped her apart like a piece of clothing. A scream. Layla finally woke up. She hurriedly ran her hands through her hair. She got up from bed and was relieved when she saw she still had blonde hair. She hurried down to the kitchen, and the fact that her phone still sat in the kitchen trash was all the reality check she needed. This had to be the worst nightmare ever, but the party was worth it. Jason had taken her number, and she hoped that in no time they were going to kick things off. Maybe he'd take her to Manhattan.
Zoom horror. "What is the capital of Colombia?" asked Travis, enjoying his turn as the quizmaster for their weekly quiz night. They'd all been friends since childhood, and university wasn't going to change that, even if they were at different ones. Travis had moved to New York, while Stefan and Ryan had stayed in their hometown of Mansfield, Massachusetts, but travelled into Boston for their studies. Sean had moved on campus at Brown University, so was only about 30 minutes from Stefan and Ryan. They still tried to see each other often, but it was hard for them all to be in the same room at the same time. The weekly Zoom quiz was something they all looked forward to. They all grew up together in the town, and their parents were all friends, meaning countless sleepovers and games while they grew up. Others had come and gone, but their friendship was the only constant. Solid. Unchangeable. "Bogota!" exclaimed Ryan. "Correct," confirmed Travis. "Another point to Ryan." Ryan was usually the winner of these quizzes, as he had an incredible depth of general knowledge. He was still living with his parents, but they were out for the evening as he was enjoying the Friday night with his old friends. All four of them were enjoying a beer together, relishing their new tradition. Ryan was on the Zoom call downstairs on the laptop, relaxing on the couch, as the other three were connected in their rooms. In which country was Lego formed? Was the next question. All three of them had little paddles that they'd lift up when they knew the answer. It was their solution to the buzzer you'd usually see in quiz shows. "The UK?" asked Sean quizzically. He knew he was behind on points, so gave a hopeful guess. Sean had his own room to himself in a block of flats on Brown campus. "Nope," chimed Ryan, putting his little paddle up. "Go on then, Ryan, what's the right answer?" said Travis. "Denmark," was his correct response. Ryan's thirst for general knowledge was unmatched in the group, though he never could put that passion into his academic studies. "Ryan wins again," stated Travis. "Well, you'll all end up with better jobs than me, so just let me have my Zoom quiz," said Ryan. Travis was also living in a flat, but his was on campus in New York. He felt the most adrift from his old friends. The 3.5-hour drive was still close enough that he could go to see them now and again. His parents still lived in Mansfield, so he was still familiar with the area. After the quiz was over, they'd usually spend a few hours talking about politics, women, sports, news, and whatever else they could think of. Sometimes it would go on until the early hours, until they were too drunk to make sense. The clock had just drifted past 10:30 p.m., all of them already a few beers down. "I'm just going to grab another beer," said Ryan. He set his laptop down on the arm of the couch, the entrance to the kitchen in the background. Ryan went for a beer and Stefan did the same, while Sean took himself off to the restroom. Ryan's house was one big circle and its main entrance opposite the stairs. Left from that was the living room, where he'd been sat all evening, leading into a larger dining area, then the back door. As you continued walking around, you'd get into the kitchen, which had a roomy understairs compartment. Following the kitchen, you'd end up back where you started, by the front door. With his 3 friends off the screen, Travis minimized the Zoom call to check on his Twitter feed. As soon as he did, he heard something smash through his headphones, and quickly flicked over to the screens on the Zoom page, but couldn't see anything. He looked at each screen to see if anything was going on, but he figured it was just one of the others dropping a glass or something. He went back to his Twitter until he heard an "I'm back" from Sean. "Did you drop a glass or something, Sean?" asked Travis. "No, buddy." "All right, I just thought I heard something." Might have been one of the other guys. Stefan was soon back on the Zoom call, new beer in hand, ready to talk about anything and everything. The 3 of them had a brief conversation as they waited for Ryan. That was until Stefan noticed something in the background. "Is that Ryan's feet?" On the screen was the doorway to Ryan's kitchen in the background. With its position on the edge of the sofa, you could see right through the dining room and all the way to the kitchen entrance at the other side of the house. What looked like feet poked out of the doorway. Someone was lying on the floor in the kitchen. It was quite far away and the webcam wasn't the highest quality, so they couldn't be sure. "Ryan, you okay?" said Stefan.
hoping he could hear him from the laptop speakers. Ryan, however, had a habit of muting the laptop when he was away from him, just in case his parents came in and his friends were talking about something inappropriate.
Is he messing with us? That is him, right?
Said a confused Sean.
Guys, I heard a crash when you were all away, but I didn't see anything. Maybe he tripped and smacked his head or something?
Said Travis. All three of them were closely looking at the screen, squinting to try and get a better look. The camera wasn't exactly high quality, and they were trying to check if what they were seeing was what it looked like. To them, it seemed like the feet and socks of someone lying on their back on the kitchen floor.
"I'll call him," said Stefan, who only lived a 5-minute walk away. He got no answer as it rung out several times. The gentle inquiries through the Zoom call started to get a little more desperate. The feet were stationary. They hadn't moved an inch.
"Ryan!"
Sean shouted, not knowing that no one in the home could hear anything from the laptop.
"He's not answering, guys. I'm going to go round. If he's pranking us, I'm going to kill him," said Stefan, a nervous laugh relaying the concern as he got up. Both Travis and Sean watched the screens closely, waiting for Stefan to arrive. Stefan was still living with his mom and dad, but he pretty much came and went as he pleased. He didn't say anything to them as he left the house to go to Ryan's. He walked briskly, wanting to run but thinking that would be silly. He shouldn't panic too much. Meanwhile, Travis and Sean looked closely at their screens. As they did, they saw what they thought were Ryan's legs judder and then quickly move from right to left. The feet disappeared as if someone dragged away the body.
"Stefan, are you there? Is Ryan okay?"
they asked desperately. They didn't get a response. Both of them turned the volume up to the maximum on their headphones, hoping to hear something. Even though Ryan had muted his computer, they could still hear sounds coming from the house. Travis decided to call both Ryan and Stefan, but both numbers rang out. They heard the clicking of a door in the background and the cry of "Ryan" coming from their headphones. Both realized it was Stefan calling out for Ryan and that he only just got to the house, which meant that he did not move Ryan. Stefan walked into the kitchen and saw a small patch of blood on the kitchen floor and a smashed plate. Ryan was nowhere to be seen, and he called out to him, trying to work out what had happened. Some of the blood appeared to be smeared, almost as if he had moved, or had been moved. Stefan took a quick look around the bottom floor and saw some more spots of blood, but not much else. He had a quick look upstairs and went into Ryan's bedroom, but saw nothing. He was trying to piece together what had happened, but had little to go on. He walked back down the stairs and decided to give his friends an update. "Hey guys, I've had a quick look and Ryan's not here, but there's some blood on the floor. Maybe he slipped and banged his head. He may have gone to hospital. I'll have another check round. If he's gone, then he's left his phone," he said to his friends, lifting up Ryan's phone, which was just next to the laptop, and showing it to them.
"Steph, we think someone else is in there,"
shouted Travis. Stefan was already walking away from the screen, the sound still muted. They watched on as Stefan walked around the room, afraid about what might happen to him, unable to contact him.
"Are we being paranoid?"
asked Travis.
"I don't know," replied Sean. "Maybe they're both just playing a prank on us. If they are, it's working."
"I don't know whether to be pissed off or terrified," said Travis. Both of them were nervous and also a little confused.
"Well, hopefully it is a prank, 'cause I'm a little scared right now,"
replied Sean. They would soon realize that it wasn't a prank. Stefan continued to look around the room while they watched on. He walked through to the living room and into the kitchen, where the small pool of blood was. Travis and Sean saw a silhouetted figure walk past the webcam and follow Stefan into the kitchen. The figure was carrying something in his hand which they couldn't quite make out at first. As the object extended out from his arm, they could both tell that it was a baseball bat. Stefan walked around the corner, followed by the man, and they knew they couldn't do anything. Shouting into their microphones was useless, and it was too late to call him. The attacker stepped into the kitchen, and what followed was a muted flurry of crashing and smashing, which then stopped. At the same spot of the camera where Ryan's feet were earlier, blood pooled, slowly. Travis and Sean were mortified by what they'd just seen. It couldn't be happening. Could it be an elaborate joke? It wasn't in their nature. It didn't feel real.
Travis, I'm grabbing my gun and going over there. You call the police. Okay, buddy. Stay safe.
Travis picked up his phone, shaking. There were 4 webcams on his screen. One was himself, looking as white as a ghost. 2 were Sean and Stefan, who had left the screen, and the other was Ryan's webcam, which currently was perched on his parents' couch with a distant image of what looked like a pool of blood in the background.
Hi, I need the police.
He considered getting in his car and driving, but he knew the near 4-hour drive would be pointless. Sean was only 30 minutes away. The police were on the other end of the phone, but Travis was in too much of a shock to give the right information.
I think someone broke into my friend's home, he said.
The officer tried to get more information out of Travis, but he wasn't making much sense. He mentioned that he'd thought it might have been a prank, that he was on a Zoom call, and how he saw what he thought was a pool of blood. Little did Travis know that the lack of clarity could be so costly. They said a car would be sent as soon as they could, but were busy with other calls. As he was mumbling over his emergency call, Sean was already speeding towards Mansfield. He'd never been in trouble with the law and had always been a good student, but here he was, with 6 beers in his system and behind the wheel. He knew it was wrong, but nothing else seemed to matter right now. He had his gun on the passenger seat with the windows open to throw as much cold air into his face as possible. He prayed that he wouldn't drive past any police cars on his way, as he was also driving faster than he'd ever done before. Overtaking at high speeds and flying around corners, he was frantic. The roads were fairly clear and he knew he'd be at the house in no time at all. All the while, he had his gun on the seat next to him, ready to be used if required. He'd never even fired a gun before. Though his father was keen on him having it, he was not keen on him learning to use it. He always resented his father forcing it upon him, but right now he was glad to have it. He sped through Mansfield, the streets that he knew so well as a child. He presumed that Travis had called the police, but wasn't taking any chances. He screeched up to the house. It was silent, eerie. There were certainly no police yet. He wondered whether he should wait outside and wait for the police, and 1,000,001 conflicts ran through his head. He tried to look into the house from the outside, but all the curtains had been drawn. He tried to call Ryan once again. No answer. He called Stefan. No answer. He called Travis.
Hi, I'm outside now, he said. Have you seen anything on the webcam?
No, said Travis. Nothing. Just that pool of blood has got a little bigger.
Did you call the police? Yeah, they said they'd be here as soon as they can.
Right, said Sean, knowing he couldn't wait.
I'm going in. If you see anything, give me a call. I'll put my phone on loud. I'll unmute the laptop if I can.
He'd seen the film and movies 1,000 times where the hero goes into the home and saves the day, but this was reality. He stood outside the door more terrified than he'd ever been before. His hand was shaking so much that he could hardly reach the door handle. This was a house that he'd been in hundreds of times before when he was a kid. He knew the layout inch by inch. He drew his gun as he walked into the home. He opened the door slowly, and all he saw before him was the bottom of the stairs and 2 closed doors either side. He could already see some marks of blood around the entranceway. There were spots on the floor and a few smears on the door handles and handrails. Sean was trembling and didn't know which door to go through first. He decided to walk through into the kitchen, not knowing what to expect. He slowly gave the door a push. It gradually swung open. As silently as possible, he crept through. As it opened, he saw that the kitchen was in a huge mess. Drawers had been opened, there were spots of blood, a few broken plates, and smashed glasses. As it opened further, he saw the 2 pools of blood, a smaller one closer to him, and a larger one a little further away by the entrance to the dining room. Sean's eyes filled up with tears, presuming that it was his friend's blood. It blocked up the doorway across from him, and he didn't want to step into it. Sean decided to retrace his steps and walk back past the front door and open the other door, which led into the living room. He opened the door with the same level of trepidation as he did the kitchen door, not knowing what would be behind it. He opened the door, and it was a much calmer sight. There were no spots of blood, and he could see Ryan's laptop in the background. He walked over slowly to it and saw that it was still connected to the Zoom chat.
Travis, are you there?
Asked Sean, with his voice shaking, unmuting the chat from his end.
Yeah, man, what's going on? Doesn't look good. There's a lot of blood, but I've not seen anything yet. I don't know where Ryan and Steph are,
said Sean, who placed his gun down on the couch to speak to Travis. All of a sudden, there was what appeared to be a thud of something falling from behind him. Sean's head swiveled around.
Did you hear that? Sounded like it came from the kitchen,
he asked, seeing if Travis had heard it too.
I think so. Why don't you just wait for the cops? I need to check if either of them needs help. I'll check properly downstairs, then I'll head upstairs, he replied, with Travis nodding his head, a sullen expression on his face. Sean grabbed his gun once again and needed to investigate. The internal layout of the home meant that it allowed him to walk around to the kitchen from the other side. Sean approached the kitchen. Travis watched on as his friend took small steps into the kitchen. Still not hearing anything else apart from the thud, Sean walked around with caution. As he approached the pool of blood, he noticed something that he'd not seen from the other side. There was a larger streak of blood from the main pool which led to another door. This was the door for the understairs compartment. It was a place where he remembered hiding from Ryan and his friends many times in a game of hide-and-seek. His heart sank at the thought of what was hidden behind the door right now. For all he knew, it could be the attacker waiting to pounce, or it could be his friends. He had to step into the blood to get to the door, which nearly made him sick. He grabbed the door handle with his left hand while having his gun drawn with the other. His plan was to open up as quickly as possible in case the attacker was behind there. He counted down from 3 silently in his head. He got down to 1, and he swung the door open. What he saw shocked him to his core. Both Ryan and Stefan were stuffed into the small space, bloodied, beaten, and unconscious. As he opened the door, Stefan slumped out of the cupboard towards him. Sean leapt back in shock, slipping on the bloodied floor, and ended up falling out of the kitchen and onto his behind. His finger jammed on the trigger, and he fired a bullet into the glass window of the back door, shattering it into a million pieces. Sean, are you okay?
Came a distant shout from Travis as Sean had stumbled into view. Sean picked himself up and was too shocked to even acknowledge his friend. Tears were rolling down his face as he walked forward to Stefan's body. He checked his pulse, and there was none to be found. It only confirmed what he already knew, as his eyes were glazed open and there was a huge crack in his head. Stefan had been dragged into the small compartment and thrown on top of Ryan's body. Sean called out to Ryan, who was equally unresponsive. 2 of his best friends were dead, and he could hardly believe it. It put him into a daze, and he became completely unaware of his surroundings. Eventually, he snapped back to reality and realized he was still in danger. With a quick look around, he wondered who could have done this. His head was fuzzy, but the constant cries from Travis in the background eventually caught his attention. Sean stumbled out of the kitchen and made his way to the laptop that was still perched on the couch in the living room. There was blood on his shoes and jeans from where he'd slipped.
Call the police,
Sean said.
I already called them. They're on their way. What happened?
Travis replied. He had underplayed the incident to the police and they didn't know the situation was as serious as it was.
Steph is dead. They're both dead. Someone's killed them.
Travis's face went white. Numb. He couldn't speak. He eventually spluttered out. I can't believe it. Saying it repeatedly. Sean just sat there like a zombie for a moment, in complete shock, unable to comprehend what happened.
Is there anyone else there?
Asked Travis, switching his concern to the best friend who he knew was alive.
No, they must have left before I arrived,
he replied, letting his guard down and putting his gun on a nearby table. Unbeknownst to Sean, the attacker had been upstairs the whole time he'd been in the house. He was stealing as much as he could possibly get his hands on, and Ryan and Stefan had gotten his way. He was just about to leave with his large bag of jewellery and electronics before Sean came through the door. He'd stayed as still as possible, but when he heard the glass smash from the gunshot, he used the opportunity to make his way back downstairs. He had a bag in one hand and his bloodied baseball bat in the other. The shadowy figure was all dressed in black and made his way slowly into the kitchen, hoping to come through the back entrance that he'd originally used and make a getaway to his nearby car. He saw Stefan slumped down on the floor where he'd slipped out of the understairs cupboard. He stepped over him and looked around the corner into the living room, seeing Sean with his back to him, talking on the laptop. He looked at the back door and wondered if he should just make his escape. With all the smashed glass, he knew he couldn't be quiet, and thanks to the accidental gunshot, he knew Sean had a gun. He'd already disabled 2 people who'd got in his way. Why not a third? One quick strike across the head and he could get away without any trouble or a bullet in the back. He stepped out of the kitchen quietly, hoping to get Sean without being noticed. Travis shook out of his daze with the dark figure approaching over his friend's shoulder. The attacker drew the baseball bat backwards, waiting to strike. He'd snuck up on the other boys and was hoping to do the same again. He was steady and slow as he paced the bat into both of his hands. "Sean, he's behind you!" Travis shouted. Sean's eyes switched to the laptop screen and saw the figure that was behind him in the webcam starting his brutal swing of the bat. Sean instinctively ducked, and as he did, the bat swing missed the top of his head by a millimetre before crashing into the laptop, smashing the screen and putting Travis in the dark. The laptop stayed on, but he didn't have a picture. The sound was still on, but all he could make out was noise, shouting. He cried out for help, but there was nothing that could be done. He knew that Sean had to fight for his life. Sean found himself on the floor with his bat-wielding madman standing over him. At that moment he got a look at him. His eyes were bloodshot, his face was gaunt, and there were scabs and cuts all over it. A drug addict, doing anything he could to pay for his next fix. The madman took the bat in both hands and swung down as violently as he could. Sean put his hands over his head while kicking up at him. The bat hit a combination of Sean's foot and arm, breaking his left arm as it took most of the force. The kick thankfully had dislodged the bat from his arms as it fell to the floor. The two tussled on the floor as Sean fought for his life. He desperately tried to reach for the gun, which was on the table close by, but he couldn't get it. As he did, the manic attacker grabbed the bat once again. Sean stopped the attacker's arm with his right hand so he wasn't able to swing it. The attacker couldn't get his arms free, and instead pressed the bat across his throat, using both hands to press down. Sean tried to grab the bat, but he couldn't relieve the pressure. His left arm had been rendered useless, and he couldn't get the bat away with his right hand. He tried to kick out, but the invader had put his weight over him. All Travis could hear in the background was a struggle. The attacker leaned forward and repeatedly head-butted Sean. The young man fell weak as he couldn't get any oxygen into his lungs, staring up at this lunatic who'd already killed 2 of his friends. He couldn't feel the blood pouring from his nose. He couldn't hear anything. The only sense he had was his vision, which was fading quickly as he ran out of breath. As he looked up, facing his certain death, his eyes started to close. Just before they did, he saw his attacker jolt to the side as his eyes rolled into the back of his head. He fell onto him before rolling onto his side. The pressure of the bat being taken from his throat was a relief. With a huge intake of breath, the rest of his senses came back to him as police officers surrounded him. They rushed over to him to make sure he was okay. He started to get a bit of breath back to whisper out the words, "I'm okay," barely believing that he was still alive. He turned his head to see the attacker slumped next to him with a bullet put straight through his brain. Before he knew it, he had EMTs talking to him as emergency workers buzzed all around. It was as if he was living his worst nightmare, dazed and confused. Travis was still connected to the Zoom call, with that nightmare played out on his screen. The 4 screens were all active. Ryan's had gone black, He had his own, and there were Sean's and Stefan's, who both abandoned their screens to help the stricken Ryan. "Are you okay, Sean?" he said to the black screen, phoning him at the same time but getting no response. Eventually, he got a small reply. "I'm okay. I'm going to the hospital," he heard back, barely through all the noise that was happening. Travis shut down the Zoom call and decided to make the long drive to Mansfield. It was the only thing he could think of doing right now. The next morning, Sean awoke in the hospital. For a split second, he thought that it had been all a terrible dream, but the reality soon crushed him. Just as he woke, he saw Travis coming into the room. "You look like shit," said Sean, jokingly. Travis's eyes were red and he clearly hadn't slept and had been crying all night. Travis scoffed at the joke before the two embraced, sharing a tear together as he pulled up a chair and sat down. "You were right about Stefan," he said, looking at the ground. "He's gone, man." Sean swallowed the truth that he already knew. "Ryan, he's still with us." "What?" retorted Sean in shocked response. "He's in a coma, but they seem optimistic. He had surgery and they think he's going to be okay," answered Travis, smiling through the tears. "Thank God. I should have checked on him. I thought they were—" "Doesn't matter," said Travis, cutting across him. "You did everything you could." The two of them talked for a while about what happened. Sean's family soon followed into the room as Sean dipped in and out of focus, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what happened. What had meant to be a fun Zoom quiz had turned into the worst night of his life. The Haunting. Chris was a nice guy. He was friendly and well-liked. The managers at the Uncle Ducky's amusement park adored him, and so did the patrons. And why not? He was an ideal employee, honest, hard-working, a boss's dream. The kind of guy who'd rather cut off his tongue than break any of the company's rules. And that's why his co-workers had to kill him. The first plan was simple. It started with Derek and Brad slumped around the break room table, sweat dripping from their bodies. "All the money those jerks are making," Derek groaned. "You'd think they could afford air conditioning." Brad smirked. "Dude, we're pulling third world wages and you're complaining about heat? This place is a joke." Brad shoved both hands up his Insane Clown Posse t-shirt, then flapped it for ventilation. "It doesn't have to be that way, you know." "What do you mean?" Derek leaned in closer. "So, I'm talking to Trina the other day, right? And she tells me about how the place got robbed last summer. Guy comes in right after closing, wearing a mask, pulls a gun on her. You know her, right? Trina, the girl who counts the registers in the office." "Yeah, I know Trina." "Check this out. Trina just gives the guy all the money, no questions asked. Guy doesn't even have to shoot anybody, doesn't need a plan really. That's all he needs, a gun, a mask, and he gets all the money these jerks earn in a day." A smile slowly crept across Brad's face. "Nice." Derek let his friend's thoughts linger for a second, then he said, "Think about how easy it would be to fake a robbery." Brad chuckled. "Dude, how hard can it be? I can get a ski mask, a gun, we can talk Trina into it. She's on break in a few minutes." Brad nodded, but said nothing, his eyes crawling across the break room table, thinking about how nice all the money would be. 5 minutes later, Trina stepped into the break room, her Uncle Ducky t-shirt yanked into a makeshift halter top, red hair dripping with sweat. "Hey guys," she said, grabbing a Pepsi from the cooler, then falling into a seat near them. The guys exchanged glances like a couple of gossiping housewives with a secret. "What's up?" she asked. "Trina, how would you like to make thousands of dollars today?" Derek asked, his voice mimicking a late-night infomercial pitchman. Nose curled, she asked, What are you talking about? Derek said, I'm talking about. Brad lifted his hand, stopped him, then slowly and quietly backed out of his chair. He took cautious steps away from the table, past the furnace and toward the bathroom. After giving the bathroom door a knock, he poked his head inside. Seeing nothing, he moved back to the table. Thought I heard something back there. That's right, Chris is supposed to be on break now, Derek said. He'd said Chris's name in a facetiously hollow tone. Brad rolled his eyes. Knowing that guy, he's probably working through his break. That's the last guy we'd want in on this. In on what? Trina asked. Brad leaned toward her. You're going to get robbed tonight. What? By who? By us. Trina's face twisted into a mess, but she didn't stop anybody from talking. All we need to do, Brad said, is bag up all the cash at the end of the day, make a phone call to the cops, tell them you've been robbed. Cops get here, you tell them some sob story about some drunken idiot in a mask pulling a gun on you, and that's it. That's it? She asked, eyes twitching between Brad and Derek. That's all? Brad shrugged. That's what happened last summer, right? Yeah, but that was different, Trina said. How? Derek asked. Far as the cops know, it's the same story. They might even think it's the same guy striking a second time. Brad said, Who's on manager shift this weekend? Mitch? He's already left for the night. You won't have to worry about him until tomorrow morning, and all you'll have to do is repeat the same story you said to the cops. Trina said nothing for a while, once again looking back and forth, almost searching for a joke. After nearly a minute of tense silence, she melted. Let's do it. The guys shared a high five. Derek jabbed his hand under the couch cushion and pulled out a bag. With his face aglow, he displayed the contents of the bag, a gun and a ski mask. Damn, dude, Brad gasped. You already had this thing planned out? Derek chuckled like a middle-aged dad. Let's just say I had faith in my ability to persuade. You're going to be careful with that thing, right? Trina's eyes widened as she pulled away from the gun. Derek lifted the gun and aimed it at his temple. Without a change of expression, he pulled the trigger, producing only a soft click. No need, it's fake. After glancing at the clock, he tucked the bag under his t-shirt, then headed for the door. All goes well, I won't even have to pull it out. Brad followed him. Yeah, I better get back to the pirate ride myself. Before stepping out the door, he studied Trina's face. You sure you're ready for this? You kidding me? I've been making slave wages here for 3 years. I'm ready. Cool. See you at close. With 5 minutes of break time left, Trina took a seat at the table, but her nerves wouldn't let her stay there. She got up and paced for a while, breath heavy, hands in and out of her pockets. The quiet made her uneasy, made her think about all the things that could go wrong. Before she got to the door, she heard something behind her. A scratching sound. Faint, but definitely there. Similar to sandpaper scraping against something metallic. The rhythm was uneven, strange. A warning. She took cautious steps down the hallway till she reached the furnace, then opened it. Trina gasped, eyes wide. Chris! Her co-worker crouched in the cramped space, scrub brush in hand as he scraped at the floor. Hi, Trina, he mumbled, eyes not meeting hers. I just thought I'd take care of this on my break. Chris, have you been here the whole time? Yeah, he whispered. Trina's face went cold, her extremities too. She added everything up in her head, knowing exactly what he must have heard in the last 10 minutes. So that means you heard us? I don't know what you mean, he said, scrubbing harder than ever. What I mean is... Chris scampered away, dropping the brush in the hallway. I better get back. And he was gone. Trina stood there, still. This was bad news and she knew it. Chris wasn't the kind of employee that would be okay with this. Everything by the book, according to the rules. That was Chris. Shaking hands, Quick breaths. She scooped the cell phone from her pocket and dialed. She tapped on the closet door like a military snare drum until she got an answer.
Yeah, Derek said.
We've got a problem.
Like what?
Like Chris, she said. He was here in the furnace cleaning up when we were talking about stuff. Our plan for tonight.
Shit.
Exactly. You know it's only a matter of time before he tells Mitch or maybe somebody higher up. My God, Derek, this is awful.
Settle down, he said. Now look, Mitch is gone for the day, so that means we've got until tomorrow morning to take care of things.
She settled her body with a deep breath, but then thought about what he'd just said. What do you mean, take care of things?
Derek added a trace of menace to his voice. What do you think I mean?
Derek, we can't.
We can and we will. Look, this is Chris we're talking about here. We cannot trust him to keep this a secret.
Maybe we should just call the whole thing off.
No, we're doing this. Trina, you've counted that money night after night. You know how much money there is at stake. Are you going to pass that up? When do you get another chance at this kind of cash? Here's the answer. Never. You pass this up and you will spend the rest of your life here, working at Uncle Ducky's, counting money that you have to hand to somebody else. Do you want that? She fumbled for words, but found nothing. Of course you don't. You're going to take this chance and you're going to run with it. Trina, we are going to do this, right?
Okay.
Say it. Say the words. Say we are going to do this. Her breaths settled, jaw looser, nerves calming down.
We are going to do this.
Now get over here and make that call to the cops and we'll take care of Chris afterwards.
Got it.
She hung up, hesitantly leaving the break room, not sure if she was more excited or scared. The call went flawlessly. The police bought the story and within an hour they were counting their takings and preparing to leave for the night. Derek hovered over his co-worker as she counted it all. It was a weekend, so the money in the safe hadn't yet been taken to the bank. This meant the stolen booty included all profits made that week, not just the night's take. All told, it added up to close to $200,000. Trina counted it twice to make sure it was real. Did she really just make more in a few minutes than she'd normally make in a year? A decade? Derek and Trina walked out of the office to the nearly empty parking lot and spotted Brad on his way home. With a subtle wave, they brought him over. The three of them slipped to the side of the office where they could see co-workers putting the finishing touches on their day's work. Others headed home. Voices low, they nodded to the familiar faces that moved to the parking lot.
How'd everything go?
Brad asked. We had a problem with our buddy over there, Derek said, nodding toward Chris, on his knees, cleaning out the fortune teller booth.
Yeah? He heard everything,
Trina said. Brad grunted like he'd been stabbed in the neck.
So, you guys think he might tell somebody?
Don't worry, Derek said. That's where you come in.
What do you mean?
You're going to take him down to the pirate ride and make sure he doesn't tell anybody. Ever. Brad stared at his friend, not sure if he actually heard the words correctly. Yes, that means what you think it means. Trina nodded in agreement, her eyes dead. There's no other way, Derek said. We do this or we work in this hellhole forever. Brad checked his surroundings, smiled at his co-workers who passed by on their way to rusted pickup trucks, Hyundais or the bus stop. He sent his gaze back to Derek and nodded weakly. After that, we'll take him to the break room.
For what?
Trina asked. Derek moved his mouth to talk, but a friendly slap on his shoulder interrupted him.
See you tomorrow, dude!
Caught off guard, he steeled his nerves and replied to the passerby.
Yeah, Keith.
He turned back to Trina and Brad. We'll talk about it then. Right now, let's just take care of step one. Got it, Brad? Brad nodded and took slow, uneasy steps toward Chris. He stood there and watched for a second as his co-worker polished the handle on the door of the fake fortune teller booth like it was a highly prized family heirloom.
Hey, Chris.
Chris turned, then spoke softly and returned to his work. Hi, Derek. You know, Chris, there's something I was having a problem with at my ride. I know you used to work that ride for a while. The pirate ride should be easy to maintain. In fact, I worked there for nearly 4 years, and the only actual repairs it needed were to the boat itself, and those weren't substantial because the boat basically stays docked for the entire time. Brad said, "Yeah, I think it has something to do with the rudder. You think you can come over and take a look at it for me?" "Sure," Chris said, springing to his feet. Brad looked back to his friends before walking over to the pirate ride with Chris. Something about their glances told them everything was going to be okay. The ride was a small yacht modelled after a pirate ship. Once there, Chris knelt down, reaching under the boat, biting his lower teeth as he felt for something. He grunted, "Everything seems okay to me." As soon as his co-worker turned away, Brad took a careful glance around, finding nobody. Then he grabbed the back of Chris's head and pressed him under the water. His limbs flailed and he gargled frantically, his body growing stiff and spastic, bringing a storm of bubbles to the water's surface. He tried to press back against both of Brad's hands, but it was no use. He reached up, clawing and grasping, sending a final throaty growl into the water before his body went limp. No more bubbles. Brad was surprised at how easy it was. He didn't even need to check for a pulse. The way the body just lay there, lifeless, made it clear that his work was done. Trina and Derek were already on their way over, their faces grim. Neither of them looked at the body when they arrived. The three of them stood there, gazes aimed at the horizon. Just another day at work. "Let's take him to the office," Derek said. Uncle Ducky's was empty by the time Brad had finished with Chris, so their path to the office was clear, uninterrupted by surprises. Derek and Brad dragged him there while Trina opened the break room door, her eyes wide with horror over what she'd just been a part of. Or maybe it was excitement. "Okay," she said, catching her breath. "What's the next step?" Derek stood over Chris's prone body and nodded toward the furnace. "Our friend's got a hot date lined up." He chuckled over his dad joke, but nobody else did. "You sure we want to do this?" Brad asked. Derek shrugged. "We have to get rid of the body. You got a better idea?" Without another word of protest, Brad reached down, grabbed Chris's shoulder. He waited for Trina to grab the other. She stared at the furnace, remembering the scratching sound from earlier a little too vividly. "What's wrong?" Derek asked her. She looked down at the body, then back to the furnace. "Nothing, I guess. I just thought I'd heard something." They dragged the body to the furnace as Derek stepped around them and fired everything up. "Anybody asks, we don't know what happened to Chris. He just disappeared." He chuckled as the other two hoisted the body into the furnace. "You sure this is going to work?" Brad asked with a laboured grunt. "Sure," Derek said. "It may take a while, but I've got all night." Once they'd put him inside, Trina and Brad watched their friend slowly close the furnace door. Then they looked away simultaneously and stood there. "Great work, guys," Derek said. "Don't know about the two of you, but I don't plan on sticking around here anymore. I suppose I'll wait a few weeks, then quit. Don't want to raise too many suspicions." Unprompted, Trina pulled the bag from under her shirt and dumped the cash on the floor. They split it 3 ways, then left. Their only conversation revolved around ways they'd spend their money. After Trina and Brad left, Derek stayed most of the night, making sure his co-worker's corpse was unrecognizable. He went home, determined to leave the evening's deed in the past, but it wouldn't be that easy. A strange scratching sound in the distance kept him up all night. The trio came back a month later, an unofficial celebration of their freedom from a lousy workplace. Brad and Trina had quit roughly a week after their adventures with Chris. Derek had waited a week after that. With so many Uncle Dickie's employees drifting in and out on a regular basis, their sudden departure raised no red flags. Chris's abrupt departure raised a few, but those faded quickly enough.
The police simply could not find a suspect, nor could they connect his disappearance to the robbery. When Trina, Brad, and Derek met up in the parking lot of Uncle Ducky's a month later, they struggled to keep smiles off their faces. "We did it and got away from it," they all wanted to scream, but in the end, they decided against such a brazen victory lap. "You guys ready to celebrate our liberation?" Derek asked as they wove through the crowded parking lot and towards the front gate. "Sure am," Trina replied. "Let's do it," said Brad. They clasped hands together on their way, a family reunited. Together they were ready to forget anything unpleasant had ever happened. But as the trio ambled inside, Chris was watching and waiting, and he remembered everything. After a stroll inside and past a few old friends, they headed first to Christy the Twisty, the ever-popular roller coaster. Trina stepped onto the ride, strapped the harness on, careful not to mess up her new hairdo and nails. She took a seat next to Brad and noticed for the first time his brand new shoes. "Ooh, leather," she purred. "I like them." "So do I," Brad answered, easing into his seat. He turned to Derek in the seat behind them, who was fastening a shiny new set of headphones to his ears. As Christy taxied up the first hill, the three of them shared a grin that wordlessly recognized their shared story. They had won. Against all odds, they'd done it. Yanked off guard, they released a collective shriek as the roller coaster sped down the first hill. It was a joy beyond joy, but it didn't last long. Climbing the second hill, the sound of the wheels clanking was replaced with something different, something weird. Trina heard an all-too-familiar scraping sound. Face slack and sheet white, she turned to Brad. Brad needed no explanation. His bugged eyes suggested he was hearing it also. Together, they turned to Derek behind them, whose stare skittered all over the place like a man under siege from something invisible. He frantically tried to raise from his seat, but couldn't because of the restraint tugging down his shoulders. When the ride lurched to the top of the next hill, he yanked off his headphones and screamed, his horrified howl somehow rising above all the other joyful screams. "We gotta get out of here!" By the ride's end, the three found themselves trying to wrench out of their restraints, drawing puzzled glances from fellow riders. Once freed from the shoulder straps, they leapt out from the coaster and elbowed through the crowd to the exit. After knifing into the parking lot, they stopped there and caught their breath. "Maybe it's a little too early," Trina said, "but it's hard to get that sound out of my head." Derek said, "Calm down, guys. We've got to be imagining it." He waited for validation on his theory. When none came, he asked, "Right?" Still nothing. Brad said, "Maybe we just need to get out of here. There's too much history here. That's all." "Yeah," Trina said. "Look, we don't work here anymore anyway. We don't have to come back. Let's just leave that memory behind and get on with our lives." They nodded together and stepped away without another word. Night had begun to fall, and things were slowing down at Uncle Ducky's. The silence was a little eerie, but the trio might have been even more spooked out if they'd been listening more carefully. They would have heard Chris laughing. In particular, he was amused by the idea that they could have left that memory behind them and gotten on with their lives. "Not a chance," he chuckled. Brad eased toward his new BMW, eyes shifting and ready for anything. Once in his seat, he waited for his nerves to settle before taking off. With a tremble in his hand, he struggled to get the key in the ignition, but he fought against it and started the car anyway, laughing to himself a little as he sped out of the parking lot. With his hands shaky on the steering wheel, he wanted to get home as quickly as possible, so he chose Highway 67, taking him over the Cedar River Bridge before getting back. The need for a fast exit grew as he heard the scraping sound echoing inside his car. He jabbed at the radio, flipping on a random station, then blasting the volume until the windows rattled. But that wasn't enough. The scrape kept coming. Louder. Angrier. Pulse racing and sweaty hands struggling to stay on the wheel, he set his foot down on the gas, thinking he could somehow outrace the memories. But it wasn't going to be easy. Traffic was too clogged, the roads too bumpy. Everything blurred past him, doing almost 90. Tires screeching, he swept around everybody in his way, but a bang out of nowhere took his hands off the wheel and sent him spinning out of control. Cedar River was ahead, and losing control meant the risk of a watery grave, especially at this speed. But tapping his brakes wasn't an option with so many cars behind him, so he had to barrel ahead to the bridge, never mind the falling safety arm. Approaching the bridge and now doing 90, he found two new dangers, a cement truck backing out of a parking lot and heading straight for his windshield, and a sliver of space between two motorcycles. He skillfully wove himself away from the truck, undistracted by the driver's angry horn, then squeezed between the motorcycles, just making it onto the bridge as the safety arm fell right after him. Cocky grin stretched across his face, Brad released a sigh and looked back at the poor saps who didn't make it on. Losers, he thought. But he had dared, he and his two friends. That's why he was driving a BMW and those losers weren't. Halfway over the bridge, he turned off his radio, unafraid of the scraping sound now. If he had to live with it, he had to live with it. Life was about danger, wasn't it? But as he neared the end of the bridge, something thumped against his hood. Too dark to see what, but it jarred him back into his seat, arms away from the wheel. Crashing through the side railing caught him off guard. The BMW took a nosedive into the water, splashing hard and heavy, then colliding with the riverbed until the dashboard met his chest like lightning. Everything happened too quickly. He was trapped before he knew it, legs crushed under the dashboard, torso around the seat. He flailed wildly, reaching for air just above him. He could jab his left hand out of the window and into the air. Pulling himself free wouldn't be easy, but it was possible. Yanking himself out of the car, he could bring his face above the water's surface. Once up, he gasped until his lungs burned, kept tugging himself higher and higher. Almost there. But his legs felt a downward tug, bringing everything back under the water. Mouth, eyes, elbows, then hands. He fought for air but found only bubbles, chest exploding in slow motion. His body went rigid. No more energy. No more life. He somehow twisted into a face-up position until his vision was washed with moonlight, rendered wavy by the water. Until somebody put the moon's light out. The scraping sound got louder and louder as Trina drove further and faster. She eyed other drivers on the road, wondering if they too could hear her, but got only looks of confusion. Maybe it would stop when she got home, or left the city, or the state. Maybe the key was getting far away from the nightmare, leaving it all behind. She heard a cackle from the back seat and looked into her rearview mirror. Chris was sitting there, face slanted by a grin. But when she turned, he wasn't there anymore. Derek choked the steering wheel until his hands nearly blistered. This wasn't happening. It couldn't have been. Doing at least 10 miles per hour past the speed limit, his eyes bounced along the landscape, scanning every distant bush, every crevice and crack between trees. That scratching sound had to be coming from somewhere. AC/DC blared on his brand new speakers, almost loudly enough to wash out the sounds he didn't want to hear. He sang along with the tune, voice soaring to the upper registers, jerking his head up and down, admiring the stunning sound system of his new Ferrari. He figured it would be best to focus on the good things in life. His new car, his new life. Why focus on the negatives? Why worry about that nagging, scraping sound reminding him how his new life became possible? It was best to move on, forget the past. He nodded to the ponytailed dork in the Toyota he passed, knowing that doofus had to be envying his new car. Then it was time to zip past him, weaving his way through I-94 in a way that was only possible with a Ferrari. Derek wiped sweat from his neck and jaw, smirking at those he passed, wondering what his life might have been like if he hadn't taken the chance he'd taken. AC/DC faded from his speakers and was replaced by Jimi Hendrix crooning another badass tune that filled his car. Derek wailed along as he cranked the air conditioner to the max, then wondered if he could turn it even higher. He groaned in disapproval, sliding his left hand up his t-shirt and flapping to cool himself down. Great car, he thought to himself, but it'd be nice if it wasn't so hot. Trina's tight face loosened into a grin when she spotted the exit up ahead. Almost home. She could breathe again, slacken her grip on the steering wheel. Maybe she could get help someday, find one of those high-priced shrinks who could convince her those sounds weren't real. There had to be a way out, and Trina was determined to find it. She laughed to herself as she flicked on her turn signal and moved toward the upcoming exit. Almost home, she thought. Almost free. Now shirtless, Derek took choppy, panicked breaths. He rolled down the Ferrari's windows and scowled to those who laughed at him in the cars he passed. What the hell was so funny? He mouthed at those losers, people driving shitty used cars laughing at him. Soon he found himself steering into the right lane, headed to the upcoming exit, only a few fingers on the overheated wheel. He swallowed hard and reached for his glove compartment, recalling that he'd stashed a few beers in there. Ouch! His hand reflexively snapped away from the glove compartment's searing hot handle. He grabbed the t-shirt he'd tossed onto his passenger seat, wrapped it around his hand, then tried the handle a second time. Still hot, but his makeshift oven mitt worked enough for him to click open the glove compartment. Once open, flames shot through it, sending him back into the driver's seat, eyes the size of $half. The flames reached his t-shirt and erupted into a bigger fire, and within seconds, smoke was everywhere. He needed to get out of the car, away from the flames. If only he could reach the exit soon enough. Trina felt better now, relaxed. The scraping sound was still there, but it had faded into the background like a neighbor's barking dog you no longer noticed after a few weeks. Better news still. She no longer saw Chris in the rearview mirror. She turned, scanning the back seat just to make sure. It was empty. No more Chris, no more cackling, no more memories. But, turning back, she unloaded a shriek, body going stiff. Flames shot through a Ferrari ahead of her, erupting to a nightmare 20 feet ahead, then 10 feet. Slamming on the brakes wouldn't be enough. She was nearly standing on the pedal, spine arched, limbs stretched, but she was seconds away already. Spinning away also didn't work. She landed in the middle of the mess as screams, honked horns, and screeching tires threaded between the scratching sound. On contact, pain was everywhere, stabbing through Trina's body, and her thoughts, and her soul. The world left her a broken mess, with only one thought. I couldn't get away. This has been Scary Stories Collection, 5 short horror stories. Written by Stories from the Attic. Narrated by Robin McConnell. Copyright 2020 by Michael van der Voort. Production copyright by Michael van der Voort.